You're listening to Fanfiction Reader, where stories come alive through sound. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the tale.
Chapter 26 Starless Night. To be honest, Duncan suddenly found that when the pigeon on his shoulder spoke, even with a nerve thicker than a pillar, it was difficult for him to walk calmly. At this moment, he wished so much that he could have a parrot on his shoulder like a normal pirate captain. How about a monkey? But he had already opened the door leading to the chart room, and it was impossible to turn his head back at this time. In the room where the nautical table was placed, the goat's head was chatting cheerfully about the 12th legend of sea fish stew. The sound of the captain's bedroom door finally interrupted the chattering guy, and his black, wooden head immediately turned to Duncan's direction, with a raised tone of voice that seemed very pleasant. "Ah, Captain. You are finally out. I want to tell you that Miss Alice is such an excellent conversation partner. I haven't had such a good time chatting with people for many years." You know, Duncan ignored the goat's head's loud urging, but immediately looked at the victim on the opposite side of the navigation table, and then saw the headless puppet sitting upright on the chair, holding himself in his hands, head, while pressing his ears firmly. Even so, Alice's eyes were still slack, as if she had taken 12 advanced math classes, and she didn't even respond when Duncan walked in front of her. "Duncan, she pulled her head off herself," Goat's head explained before Duncan could speak. "Although I don't know why she did it. How powerful is the goat-headed babble, that it can force a cursed doll to pull its head off to fight against the sound wave?" Exclamation. While Duncan was shocked, the goat's head, who said he was happy, finally noticed a strange guy brought out by the captain. His wooden head turned slightly, and his dark eyes suddenly stared at the pigeon on Duncan's shoulder. "Huh? Captain, this is on your shoulder. It's called AI, and it's my pet from now on," Duncan said succinctly, using as few sentences as possible to avoid possible loopholes, and at the same time observing the reaction of the goat head after hearing this. "Your pet?" Goat's head was obviously stunned for a moment, and then he seemed to think about something on his own. Just now the lost country did sense that you left the ship temporarily. You are going to walk in the spirit world. Is this the spoil you brought back from your walk in the spirit world?" Walking in the spirit world? A word that had never been heard before popped up suddenly, and Duncan thought of the brass compass placed in the captain's bedroom, the handwriting left by the real Captain Duncan, and the wonderful experience of the soul traveling and projecting into the distance. He faintly corresponded to it in his heart, and after feeling that he guessed pretty well, he nodded calmly. "It's just a little relaxation." As soon as Duncan finished speaking, the goat's head immediately complimented him as expected. Really worthy of the great Captain Duncan. Even a simple walk in the spirit world can bring back spoils. Is this a pigeon? There must be something special about being your pet. You even attach your compass to it? Is that? "Oh sure, you're always right, but what's so special about this pigeon?" Could it be? Duncan heard something euphemistic in the goat's head's compliment, and with a twitch he realized that the goat's head clearly knew the brass compass that was now hanging on Ice's chest, and that this compass was obviously very special to the real Captain Duncan. Important, so important that it shouldn't be placed on a new pet casually. But even if he noticed something wrong, he could do nothing, because the compass was tied to the pigeon now, and even, judging from the control feedback of the fire of the spirit body, the pigeon seemed to be the compass at this moment, like the body. Duncan thought quickly in his heart, but his face still maintained an unwavering expression, and just in such a dazed moment, AI, who was originally squatting on his shoulder obediently, suddenly let out a loud cooing sound. Immediately afterwards, it flapped its wings and flew in front of the goat's head. The goat's head's dark eye stared at the pigeon for an instant, and the latter tilted his head in a serious manner, pecking at the face of the goat's head with his beak. "Do you want to charge Q coins? Duncan, anomaly with intelligence?" The goat's head was also obviously stunned, but then he reacted and his tone was extremely surprised. "This pigeon can actually talk?" Duncan immediately reminded me tactfully, "You can also talk." Pigeon AI also took 2 steps on the table, walking away, while muttering to himself, "Is it like a word? Is it like a word?" Upon seeing this, Duncan rubbed his fingertips, and with the sudden jump of the green flame, the pigeon pacing on the table disappeared into the air in the blink of an eye, and returned to his shoulder in the next instant. "Yes, an anomaly with intelligence, and it's under my direct control." Duncan nodded at the goat's head. "Is there any problem?" The goat head quickly replied, "Of course not, of course not. Then there will be no problem at all. Everything is under the control of the great Captain Duncan." Duncan stopped talking about the goat's head, and after quickly ending the topic, he focused on Alice, who was still holding her head in a daze. Perhaps the previous open-minded experience further strengthened his nerves, and also maybe it was because he got used to it after watching it a few times. He didn't think it was too evil when he saw Alice holding her hair in a daze. Instead, he thought this guy was a little cute. He reached out and patted Miss Doll on the shoulder. Wake up, wake up." Alice's body trembled suddenly, as if waking up from a long nightmare, and then the head held in her hands opened and closed its mouth and made a sound. Bo chip ship Duncan, you connect the head first. Only then did Alice come to her senses, and hurriedly put her head back to its original position. After the joints closed with a click, her voice finally became smooth again. Captain, you're back. It seems to have happened just now. Mr. Goathead finished? The goat head on the table immediately said, No, we just talked about some legends about sea fish stew. This topic can be next time, Duncan said succinctly. Shut up. Oh. Alice on the side trembled visibly the moment the goat's head opened its mouth, and a cursing puppet showed a horrified expression on its face. Even though the goat's head obediently closed under the captain's order in the next second mouth, she still looked in the direction of the navigation table with lingering fear. Duncan doubted that this doll lady would not step into the captain's cabin for quite a long time in the future. Thinking of this, he finally asked curiously, You came to see me, what's the matter? Alice's expression was a little dull, as if her original goal of visiting the captain's cabin had been forgotten after a conversation with the goat's head, but she still realized after a few seconds, Oh yes, I just want to ask, is there a place where I can take a bath on the boat? My wooden box has been in sea water before, and now I feel that my joints are a little uncomfortable. In the end, the expression on Miss Doll's face was obviously a bit embarrassed, but in fact, it should be Duncan who was more embarrassed than her after all. Duncan threw her box overboard before, and threw it several times. Embarrassment flashed across his heart, and Duncan tried his best to maintain the same expression on his face, and his tone was flat. Just for this? Alice sat on the chair stiffly. Just for this. For many ocean-going ships, fresh water is an extremely precious resource, and bathing is a luxury that requires restraint, Duncan said solemnly at first, but then suddenly smiled. But you were lucky, the Lost Country is not an ordinary ship, and fresh water is not a problem here. Come with me, there is a bathing place in the cabin below the middle deck, and to get there, you have to go through the upper deck first. Alice stood up immediately. She really didn't want to stay in the place where the goat's head was placed for a second. Duncan looked back at the goat head before leaving the room. You continue to steer. After explaining, he got up and pushed open the door of the captain's cabin, and brought Alice to the deck. Night had fallen by now. The night sky over the boundless sea is clear. This was the first time Duncan stood under the clear night sky of this world after days of cloudy clouds. He stopped suddenly, looked up at the sky, and stared at the night without moving. The night sky is dark and starless, without any celestial bodies. The only thing that can be seen is a faint gray-white crack that seems to tear the entire sky, slowly dissipating outward, like bloodstains in a pool of deep water. This pale scar across the sky illuminated the entire boundless sea, more than twice as bright as the moonlight in Duncan's memory. Chapter 27 Insufficient reserve of common knowledge of life. In a sense, the starless, moonless sky with only one scar had an impact on Duncan that was far greater than the sun imprisoned by the rune circle. Because no matter how abnormal the sun is, it only shines on the heaven and earth under Duncan's feet, and in Duncan's cognition as an earthling, the so-called sun is nothing more than one of billions of celestial bodies. All distorted visions are limited under the sunlight, and in the sky outside the sunlight, there can also be stars with infinite possibilities. Although for a creature trapped in gravity, it is impossible to see under the sunlight. It is equivalent to the whole world, but at least, in this case, Duncan can still understand and accept the scale of this vision. However, in the night sky at this moment, Duncan did not see any celestial bodies that could be called stars. There were no stars, no moon, and no distant galaxy. Some are just a torn scar, covering the sky with some kind of light and shadow posture that he can't understand, and the pale light mist is constantly escaping outward. The entire boundless sea is shrouded in this pale as snow night. Farther than the sun lies distant nothingness and greater visions. Duncan didn't say anything, just stared at the sky. Countless questions and conjectures were circling in his mind. Where are the other planets? Did it not exist from the beginning? Or, the world under my feet is a celestial body located in the vacuum of the universe. It is so far away from other stars that the night sky here is pitch black and starless? What is that pale scar across the sky? Is it a tearing gap in space? Is it a celestial structure that can be touched? Or is it just a phantom floating above this treacherous boundless sea? Captain? Finally, there was a voice that woke Duncan from the silence. The puppet Alice looked nervously at the ghost captain, who suddenly stopped. She saw that the other party's face suddenly became more gloomy and serious than before, which frightened her. Are you all right? Could it be that the sky is about to change? Is there a big storm? I heard the sailor outside the box say this. Nothing, Duncan said softly, then suddenly withdrew his gaze from the sky, looked at Alice flatly, as if to answer, and repeated as if to himself, nothing. Then Duncan stepped forward, with a calm expression as if nothing happened. "Come on, I'll take you to the cabin. You can also wash there later, if you need to wash." Once again, the world has shown Gentiles its weirdness, and the weirdness seems far from over. Duncan has already realized that he does not know how many astonishing visions are waiting for him in the future. If he makes a fuss every time, he will probably only make a fuss in his life. If there is any experience that he has accumulated in his life experience on Earth in the past few decades, there is one that is most useful today. If a problem does exist, then find a way to solve it. The problem will not disappear by itself because of his denial, just like the weird sky in front of him will not become starry because of his questioning. There must be a reason why this world presents such a posture. Since everything can exist here, then this is an irrefutable fact. No matter how absurd or weird the phenomenon is, it is also an objective reality. I can't understand, that's my own problem, not the world's problem. As the current captain of the Lost Home, Duncan feels that he may have a long time to slowly understand the world. Alice didn't know the reason for the captain's silence along the way. She only knew that the atmosphere around Duncan suddenly became a little depressing, but after arriving at the target cabin, this depressing feeling suddenly disappeared. Duncan brought Miss Doll to the place where she can take a bath. This is a bathroom for upper-class sailors, for a classic sailing ship. This kind of bathroom is considered a kind of luxury facility. The facilities are certainly not for ordinary sailors. The living conditions of sailing ships in ancient times were actually quite harsh when sailing in the ocean. Limited fresh water, spoiled food, poor medical treatment, and psychological problems caused by long-term voyages plagued every explorer who challenged the sea. On the Earth, many of these problems were not fully resolved even in the pre-industrial age. As far as Duncan knows, the early sailing ocean-going ships on the Earth did not even have toilets for ordinary crew members. The personal problems of ordinary sailors are usually solved on the grill facing the sea. This process also pays attention to the wind direction, and bathing is even more important. It's a tough problem using a spare sail as a bath, and washing your body with seawater is the solution for many unscrupulous sailors, and many more sailors of the age of sail simply choose not to bathe for weeks or even months. After all, compared with scurvy, plague, and mass hysteria caused by great mental pressure, a little hygiene problem is the least important. But ironically or not, on a ghost ship that everyone fears, these terrible survival problems are solved instead. The freshwater tank on the Lost Home will replenish itself. The food in the warehouse has no signs of corruption. The ghost captain will not get sick, and Alice's cervical spine problem is not caused by navigation. Apart from the frequent rise in blood pressure when getting along with the goat's head, this ship is actually quite livable. The pipe next to the bathtub leads to the freshwater tank. Just take the water directly. The plug of the bathtub is hung over there, so don't lose it. The current conditions are limited, and there is no hot water supply on board, but you should not mind this. Duncan introduced the facilities in the cabin to Alice, and these ordinary experiences were all the results of his exploration in the past few days. It's enough to just rinse your body. It's really uncomfortable to have salt water in your joints. Alice was not picky at all. She looked at the various things in the cabin with a little curiosity and excitement, and nodded while listening to Duncan's introduction. Said, "I'm just a puppet, and I don't have much pursuit of a hot bath." Duncan nodded, but then his expression became a little weird. He glanced at Alice and said with a slightly hesitant tone, "Speaking of which, do you know how to take a shower? Do you have this kind of life experience?" Alice was really stunned for a while, and then she said seriously while thinking, "It should. Okay. Just take the joints apart, rinse them, and put them back after washing." Duncan. He looked at Alice, and Alice looked at him innocently. "Have you thought about how to put it back on your own after you take it down?" Duncan knew that his casual question was a reminder. The puppet in front of him, who had never left the box, really had no experience in this field. "I didn't wait to help you, Alice. It seems to be the same, and I don't recommend that you dismantle your joints frequently," Duncan reminded earnestly, "even if your body structure allows it." Alice was a little confused. Why? It's easy to dismantle too much. Duncan finally felt helpless. He never thought that there would be so many details when staying on the same boat with a cursed doll. This has never been mentioned in novels, movies, and TV shows. "I don't want you to walk on the deck one day and suddenly scatter all over the ground in front of me. No one on board knows how to maintain the joints of the doll." Speaking of this, he paused and added, "Your cervical spine problem is serious enough." Alice imagined the scene for a while, and immediately shrank her neck. Okay, I understand." "I thought about what to do. It's best," Duncan said, and looked at the puppet with little life experience a little worriedly, before turning around and leaving. "I still have a lot of things to do. Don't make too much trouble." "Okay, Captain." "Thank you, Captain," Alice said happily, but just as Duncan was about to walk out of the cabin, she suddenly spoke again. "Oh yes." Captain Duncan stopped and turned his head slightly. "What else?" "Captain, I suddenly feel that you are not that scary." Alice looked at Duncan's back and carefully considered her words. "That go-head said that you were the most terrifying captain on the boundless sea, the most terrifying captain on all routes. Unfathomable calamity, but what? But I think you seem to be very talkative, and you are a bit like a worrying parent." Duncan didn't look back, but asked suddenly after 2 seconds of silence, "Where do you come from the concept of family? Do you have family?" Alice hesitated for a moment, then shook her head slowly. "It seems not." "Then don't talk about parents, just stay on the boat honestly, and I will arrange your life on this boat." "Oh, good Captain." Chapter 28 Pale Night. Real life is different from weird stories, and the biggest difference is that you have to consider a lot of real and trivial details when you live in reality. Do movable curse dolls need joint maintenance? Will Alice's frequent disassembly of joints cause her to suddenly fall apart as she walks in the future? Did the bacon and cottage cheese on the ghost ship ever expire? Do the superheroes who socialize during the day and fight with evil forces at night sleep or not? Do the evil forces who have fought with superheroes usually go to the supermarket to buy things? I never tell you this in the story. The people in the story are always in white clothes, come and go like the wind, and the cursed doll in the story only needs to come out of the corner suddenly to scare people. Just like in the story, the ghost captain never had to worry about having a century-old bacon and hard cheese on board. In reality, the cursed doll is scratched all over after soaking in seawater, and even after taking a bath, he has to temporarily think about how to deal with the salt particles in the joints. Duncan, who was standing outside the cabin, sighed, realizing more clearly that to survive on this ship for a long time seems to require more than just determination. He also had to consider a lot of practical problems, especially after the increase of the crew. In fact, there are not too rich living materials on the ghost ship. Duncan is very clear about this. This ship has an unlimited supply of fresh water, but the unlimited supply is only fresh water. The ingredients stored in the food warehouse will not be automatically replenished after consumption, and the only edible things there are bacon and hard cheese. While none of them showed signs of decay due to the special nature of the lost home, Duncan still reasonably suspected that they had been stored for at least a century. In addition, there are no replacement clothes suitable for Alice's size on this ship, although the cursed puppet did not mention this demand, and there is nothing that can be used for entertainment, even a chess set, a vice poker. The boundless sea is vast and boundless, but it is difficult for the lost homeland to obtain real supplies from the vast sea. This ship does not seem to have a reliable home port to stay and repair, and it does not communicate with the civilized city-states on land. Channels. The goat's head didn't seem to care about this problem at all. But Duncan had already seriously thought about it at this moment. He wanted to find a way to improve the current lack of supplies on the lost home. Furthermore, he is also considering how to establish contact with the city-states on land. Drifting blindly on the sea forever is an extremely inefficient method of exploration. Information about this world must be obtained from land. This is Duncan's deepest experience after walking in the spirit world. Putting this aside, even for his own physical and mental health, he has to try to get in touch with the city-states on land and the civilized society of this world. Otherwise, he is really worried that after a long drift he will really become a distorted, gloomy, and withdrawn ghost captain. Thinking of this, Duncan turned his head slightly and looked at Ai the pigeon, who was obediently combing his feathers on his shoulder. His gaze was mainly on the brass compass on Ai's chest. Pigeon tilted his head to look at his master and suddenly said, "Open a subbase. Spread the creep blanket. Hey, can you operate it?" Duncan was silent for a while. The pigeon was neurotic most of the time, but the words it popped up occasionally were so appropriate, even so appropriate that one couldn't help but suspect that it was wise and stupid. At present, walking in the spirit world seems to be the only feasible means of going to the land city-state. Although there seems to be too much uncertainty in this method, and there have been mysterious accidents like AI after the last use, Duncan knew that he would soon carry out his next spirit walk not only in order to collect intelligence on land, it is also to verify and master a very useful ability as soon as possible. Equally important, as walking in the spirit world, is the special ability of the pigeon AI who brought back a ritual knife from a distant land. If it brought back a pocket knife, could it bring back something more? What are the rules and restrictions on what the bird can carry? Can this process be controlled by humans? After thinking for a while, Duncan decided to ask the pigeon directly, "Do you know how you brought that knife back?" The pigeon thought for a while and said in a deep voice, "You need more crystal mines." Duncan, he decided to give up communicating with the pigeon for the time being, and it would be more reliable to try it himself next time he performed the spirit world walk. In the cabin, Alice finally figured out how to use the water pipes and then roughly figured out how to take a bath. On the ghost ship with limited conditions, she can only take a cold shower, but for a puppet, this is not a problem at all. But before jumping into the tub, Alice decided to go over the whole cabin first. She patted the huge oak barrel and knocked on the pillars supporting the cabin. She kicked the floor under her feet with her toes and she tiptoed to pull the ropes and hooks hanging from the roof. "Hello, my name is Alice," she greeted these cold things happily, just like she greeted the goat-headed gentleman before. "I will live on this ship from now on." Nothing in the cabin responded to her greeting, but Alice paid no attention. Goat's head said that the lost homeland is alive, and many things on this ship are alive. Although none of them seem to have the real intelligence like the goat's head, and they don't even have the ability to communicate, but this does not prevent Alice from treating the entire lost country as a neighbor who needs to greet. Homeland was a living thing and so was she. Convinced that her greeting was polite and appropriate, Alice's mood became even happier, and then she took off her gorgeous dress and climbed awkwardly into the oak barrel that had been filled with water. The first step is to take off the head and rinse at the joints, and the neck are not very strong anyway. Miss Doll thinks her plan is very reasonable. In the middle of the night, the Peelin city-state finally ended the hustle and bustle of the whole day. Under the pale light of the night sky, this prosperous pearl of the sea gradually fell into a peaceful sleep. But in the quiet darkness, there are night watchmen watching the city after falling asleep. On the Great Clock Tower, the tallest building in the city-state of Pratt, a young lady with long gray hair and an unusually tall figure is standing in front of the window overlooking the city. This lady's facial features are very beautiful, but there is a striking scar across her left eye that is daunting. Her figure is taller than ordinary men, and she is wearing silver-gray light armor and battle skirt. She is obviously worn out. Exercise, the muscles of the limbs are full and the lines are well proportioned, and beside her, within easy reach, there is a giant sword exuding a faint silver light. The hilt of the giant sword is engraved with symbols that symbolize ocean waves. There is also a glimmer of light floating on the blade like water waves. Behind the lady, the sound of mechanical operation can be heard continuously. The movement of the big clock tower is running smoothly under the drive of the steam engine. A mimetic planetarium deep within the building is in constant operation. Judging from the sound, this huge and sophisticated machine is running very well, and no evil force has invaded the Sakikard steam core. But Judge Fana still had a faint uneasiness in her heart, a bad premonition that some events were about to happen or had already happened, and she was destined to be helpless about it, which made her very irritated. Footsteps came from the direction of the stairs, and the gray-haired woman in front of the window turned around in search of the sound. She saw a priest wearing a sea priest's robe coming up from the stairs. The priest was holding a copper incense burner in his hand. Cleansing the smoke was slowly winding around him. The pastor came to the movement column in the center of the room, took down the old incense burner that was originally hanging on the guardrail of the column, and replaced it with a new one. He observed the smoke escaping from the incense burner, and confirmed that there was no smoke floating around those rotating gears and connecting rods. He whispered the name of the storm goddess in a low voice, and turned to look at the gray-haired lady standing in front of the window. "Your Excellency, Ian, are you keeping watch in person again? I've always had a bad feeling. It's always been the last few days, especially tonight. Bad premonition? Where is it?" The pastor raised his head. His deep eyes were filled with worry. "Did the goddess send an omen to you?" "Not so clear." The young female judge shook her head. "I just have a vague feeling something is approaching this city." Chapter 29. The people who protect the city. The gods with supreme power live in the cornerstone of this world, watching the movement of the world with the eyes beyond time and space, and the devout believers who convert to God with spiritual power will see it from the secret connection between themselves and the gods to a certain extent. Some real future trends or changes that are happening in an unknown corner of the world at this moment. This kind of peeping is not bound by time and space, and implies the risk of being eroded by warp space, but for those devout believers with a strong will, this dangerous and powerful force is what they use to protect the infinite ocean. The greatest reliance on lighting the fragile lights of civilization. The devout inquisitor had been seeing a similar vision for days. In a half-dream and half-awake state, she saw that the boundless ocean was stained with ink, and then there was a thunderous noise from the depths of the sea. The ocean was split into two, and there was a terrifying trench reaching the seabed in the middle, and a giant ship burning with flames rose from the seabed and slowly floated up in midair like an airship, and an invisible giant covered in starlight followed behind the giant ship, step by step, towards the direction of the Pradesh city-state. In Judge Vanna's life so far, such a large and terrifying omen has only appeared twice. The first happened as a child, when she woke up from a bloody nightmare, lost her parents in a cult attack, and left a lifelong scar on her face. The second time happened 4 years ago. In a dream, she saw a dark sun rising from the city-state, and thus wiped out the largest stronghold of the sun god sect infiltrating the city. To this day, the ghosts of those cultists, the lingering minions, are still hiding in the huge, complex, and ancient tunnel system underground in Perland, engaging in meaningless entanglements with the guardians of the church. For the third time, she saw a ship return from the depths and bring into the world a nameless giant. She lied to the priest in front of her. The omen she saw was actually very clear, so clear that she, the judge, could not sleep for days. The pastor looked at the calm gray eyes of the lady in front of him, and after hesitating for a long time, he finally spoke. But you prayed to God, and it seems that you haven't received any bad feedback? The goddess may not remind you of all the risks. Sometimes tribulations are just the test, Fana said calmly. Let's not talk about that. What's the news from the Explorers Association? The pastor nodded immediately. The liaison person from the association has just sent a message. The relics left at the headquarters of the association have sensed that the ship has appeared in the southwest waters, but there seems to be a problem with the telegraph device on the ship, and it is currently in a state of being unable to contact. It can only be ascertained that the ship was approaching the offshore waters of Prand at normal speed and course, disappeared in the perception of the holy object for a while, and then appeared out of nowhere on another sea surface that deviates far from the planned route. The current state is unable to contact, and it is heading straight to the city-state and was escorting the abnormal object before losing contact. Mission, the judge frowned a little bit. The intuition brought about by dealing with strange things all year round was beating, which made her vigilant. I remember that ship is called the White Oak, right? Yes, the White Oak. The captain is Lawrence Creed, a member of the Explorers Association, an experienced captain. Due to the special cargo being transported, the ship reported to the church before sailing from the city-state of Renset, the pastor said while recalling. By the way, the accompanying priest on the ship is a registered priest of the Deep Sea Church. Church compatriots. I hope the situation is not too bad, Vanna said in a serious tone. In short, something is wrong with that ship, and the entire route from Lensa to Pure End is under the control of the Explorers Association. However, the ship disappeared in the perception of sacred objects. I suspect that the White Oak may have left the real world for a short time, and even may have gone to places it shouldn't have gone. Inform the guards of the port to keep an eye on the White Oak immediately after it enters the port. No one or anything can leave the ship until all inspections are completed. Is there any response from the security forces? Please rest assured, your uncle, His Excellency the Consul, has ordered the sheriffs to control the surrounding area of the port and raised the alert level of the port. Alternate port on the side. That's fine. Uncle has always been a cautious person. The tense expression on Fan Na's face finally relaxed a little, as long as he doesn't let ordinary people in the security force get involved in this matter. The pastor looked into Fana's pale gray eyes, carefully selected his words and said, Do you think that ship has been polluted? It's not certain yet, but even if a ship that leaves the real world for a short period of time eventually returns, it is rare for it to be completely normal. It may be that some items on the ship have unknowingly alienated and become abnormal, and it may be hidden in the hearts of the crew. Mental illness in the depths, maybe even extra sailors and replaced captains. It is always right to exercise the highest vigilance for sea ships that have experienced abnormal phenomena. Alas, I hope that the ship and its crew are all well. The priest couldn't help but put his hands across his chest, chanting the name of the storm goddess. May the storm goddess protect those who bravely challenge the sea. May they be well. Fana also lowered her eyelids and blessed softly, and then seemed to be reminding the pastor in front of her. But if unfortunately they are not well, we have to be prepared. Yes, I understand. Fana nodded. But just as she was about to refocus her attention on the city outside the window, a burst of hurried footsteps suddenly came from the direction of the stairs. The next moment, a guard wearing a uniform with a black background and silver trim, with the emblem of waves and daggers on his chest, ran up the stairs quickly. Your Excellency, Judge. The young guard gasped twice and immediately said in a hurried tone, We found a cult sacrificial base for worshipping the sun god in the sewer, and we also captured a group of believers. Fan Na's expression became extremely serious in an instant. Those cultists who worship the dark sun? Wait, you said that what you found was a sacrificial place, not a hiding place? How dare they hold sacrificial activities again? Yes, it's the place where the sacrificial ceremony was held. We found evidence that the sacrificial ceremony was held, the guard said quickly, and also found a large number of victims in the crypt not far from the ceremony site. Among them, most of them have been sacrificed with their hearts. It's just that the situation at the sacrifice site is not right. Fana saw the absurd and confused expression on the guard's face. She picked up the heavy sword that was blessed by the goddess of storms from the side, and walked quickly towards the stairs while carrying it on her back. Lead the way. I will go to the scene myself. Yes. The heavy blessing sword and the metal shoulder armor made a clear and crisp impact, and hurriedly walked through the long stairs in the big clock tower. Fanny came to the small square in front of the big clock tower, and saw that several guards had gathered standing here. The 2 steam walkers are parked on the edge of the square, and there are continuous clicking sounds from the spider-like mechanical body. Fan Na didn't stop, but gave the guards a start signal, and walked straight to one of the walking machines. This huge machine the size of 2 carriages looked like a mechanical spider lying on the ground. Its steel wheels for easy sliding on flat ground and steel hooks for special environments are installed on the edges of the limbs, while on both sides of the upper shell of the walking machine are shooting cockpits with revolving guns. It is difficult for pure technological creations to have enough impact on abnormalities or anomalies, but crushing firepower can kill those heretics who hide behind and manipulate anomalies. Of course, this thing is not very effective in the sewer. Out of power, it can be used to block doors, but it is quite easy to use. Wholly 8mm bullets poured out, sending hordes of heretics trying to escape in the blink of an eye to serve their lord in the warp. The gray-haired and gray-eyed judge jumped directly onto the carapace of the walker, and stood firmly in the night with his long sword on his back. The other 2 guards climbed into the shooting cockpit on both sides of the carapace, followed by a group of a series of cylinders and compression pipes made the sound of pressurization and pressure release, and white steam spewed out from the joints of the walking machine. The huge mechanical spider immediately got up, jumped to the nearest main road in one step, and then slid quickly headed for the nearest sewer entrance. It's time to push the book again. The title of the book is Into the Unscientific, a Black Science and Technology essay by Zuba, who has been breastfeeding several times and is alive and kicking. Now the 1.4 million words are almost 10,000 pre-ordered. If you are interested, you can go and have a look. Chapter 30 Traces of a Mess. The huge and heavy mechanical spider folded and shrunk its long jointed limbs to its abdomen, and used the wheel structure outside the jointed limbs to glide at high speed on a straight road. Judge Fanna stood firmly, as if cast on the carapace of this mechanical creation. As she walked, the night wind with a slight sea smell blew across the street, and the cold air made her mind clear. Those cultists who worship the sun god are the henchmen of modern civilization, and unfortunately, there are more than one such henchman. There are always malicious sights cast from the depths of the subspace to the human world, and there are always stupid mortals trying to meddle with those unknown powers, and between the collusion between ancient gods and mortals, there are twisted things left from ancient times. In the depths of the city-state lurks taboo children and pollution reverberations, ready to move at all times, trying to shake the order structure of this society. Of all these threats, the followers of the sun god are the one that most vigilant and troublesome for the protectors of the city-state of planned. They are not only cultists, but also the product of a part of the lost history of the old world. Compared with most stupid and blind ordinary cults, the most dangerous thing about these heretics who worship the dark sun is that they have some kind of belief, despite fanaticism and twisting, and despite its low-level members being mixed with dragons and snakes. There is indeed a certain core belief that has not changed for thousands of years in the upper echelon of this hateful sect. This belief revolves around the era of order illuminated by the old sun. Not only is it self-contained, but there is even a corresponding true solar calendar that is not recognized by modern civilization. They firmly believe that they are a long-lost descendants of the ancient civilization, and think that the glorious ancient civilization will be revived. As the judge of the Deep Sea Church, Fan Na is not very interested in the fallacies and heresies of those cultists, but she knows that it is the existence of these fallacies that make the followers of the sun god far more united and stubborn than other heretics. It can still survive tenaciously after blows again, and grow day and night in the shadow of many city-states. But their resurgence in Pulan still surprised Fanna a little. Since the unprecedented blow 4 years ago, the followers of the sun god in the city-state of Prat have been seriously injured. According to several investigation reports, those heretics should have transferred their main members to nearby Lensa, Moroccan Key, and even the city-state of Cold Harbor farther away. What remains in Plant are basically only some bewitched and stubborn people who are not qualified to transfer with the bishops. These minions are hiding in the sewers, completely relying on their understanding of the underground world and the twisted blessings given to them by the Black Sun to escape the guards. After 4 years, their number is getting smaller and smaller. The only thing left to do is to hang on. But today, 4 years later, they suddenly gathered together again, even daring to hold a sacrificial ceremony in the assembly hall at the risk of exposure. Who gave them the courage? Or, what major event is going to happen in this city-state? Is there some reason enough for those cultists to draw Black Sun's attention to Prand even at the risk of being snuffed out the last flame? The vibration and noise of the steam core's continuous operation came from the mechanical spider's body, and the faint scent of incense overflowed from the steam pressure relief pipe and floated along with the night wind. Fanna temporarily put away her wild thoughts and looked up at the sky. Creation of the world hangs high in the night sky, casting pale light that illuminates the high and low scattered houses, chimneys, and towers in Pran City. Now the action team is passing through the edge of the industrial area, and those buildings straddling the factory buildings, huge steam and hydrothermal pipes of the siege run through the sky above the streets like giant veins. Fanna vaguely recalled the past, and recalled the deepest and most terrifying night in her memory. In that bloody midnight, her uncle escaped from the sea of fire with her on his back, and the streets were full of trapped people. The collective hallucination of the walking dead, and the swollen shadows of flesh and blood, they escaped from the pipes of the factory. The smell of blood and the smell of chemical grease seeping from the pipes is disgusting. There was a sudden vibration from the mechanical spider under her feet, and Fanna woke up from her memories. The flat road came to an end, and ahead was an abandoned area on the edge of the city. The road surface was potholed and uneven. The two mechanical spiders ended the sliding mode. They stretched out their long joints and began to walk quickly on the uneven road. It didn't take long for the team to arrive at an abandoned sewer entrance. Another 8-person team is already on standby here, and they have sealed off the surrounding area to prevent irrelevant personnel from approaching this entrance. Fanna greeted the subordinates here, and then followed the person in charge directly into the depths of the sewer. Through the deep corridor and the dirty path, Vanna finally arrived at the secret meeting place here. She saw more guardian warriors, and the priest of the church who was performing the purification ceremony. A temporary sacrificial altar is located in the center of the meeting place. The wooden platform seems to have been burned by flames. On the platform, you can also see the blasphemy totem built by the sun god cultists. The totem has been burned by the flames, but the basic structure is still intact. Around the high platform were dozens of cultists squatting on the ground with their hands bound. Most of them were trembling, while a few of them moved their lips and muttered their blasphemous prayers silently. But with the sight of the ceremony being destroyed and the storm goddess already paying attention, these heretical prayers are useless at all. Not far from the sacrificial altar are the remains of victims found in nearby caves. These tragic victims are placed on linen cloth painted with runes, and the embalmers who rush to inspect each one state of the body. Several priests of the church were walking around the sacrificial altar. The copper chains in their hands shook slightly. The incense burner at the end of the copper chain emitted pure white smoke. When the smoke touched the ground near the altar, it would be immediately stained with an ominous layer. The black shadow of the black sun and more white smog will take away these pollutions. The breath left by the black sun will be cleared little by little in this process. Your Excellency, please come here. This is something we found to be wrong, said the young guard, pointing to the corpses next to the sacrificial altar. Please be careful, the ground here is not very clean. Fanna walked straight towards the corpses, and after seeing the condition of one of the corpses, she frowned subconsciously. It was a cultist wearing a golden mask. Undoubtedly, it was the priest who was directly in charge of the sacrificial ceremony in this blasphemous sacrificial field. There was a horrible hollow in his chest. What's going on here? Fanna frowned. Did this fanatical heretic get too excited at the end of the ceremony and sacrificed himself? I've never heard of those cultists who worship the black sun. This kind of rule. This is the weird part, he didn't sacrifice himself. The guard who brought Fanna shook his head immediately, and said with a strange expression on his face, according to the description of the cultist caught at the scene. Their messenger was sacrificed by a sacrifice. Fanna raised her eyebrows immediately. What kind of crazy talk is this? It's really like crazy talk. The guard spread his hands helplessly. In fact, when we arrived, most of the cultists here were already half crazy. Already in a half-mad state? Yes, there was obviously a big mistake in their sacrificial ceremony. Many people were infected with madness, and many people even started to kill each other. They all seemed to regard each other as, by some kind of horrible thing. The occupied monsters, it was precisely because they rushed out of the meeting place in their madness that they alerted the sheriff who was patrolling nearby, which led to the exposure of the situation. When we arrived, those who could stay awake and answer questions, there are not many left, and the few remaining who can still speak fluently insist that they are sacrifices and sacrificed messengers. Crazy? Killing each other? And thinking that other people are occupied monsters? Fanna's expression immediately became serious. Have you done an inspection? Is it the result of being polluted by the black sun? I can't find any traces of contamination from external sources, but it's more like a kind of spontaneous madness. The factors that lead to madness are rooted in their own spiritual world, the guard said, pointing to a heretic. A young lady in a long black dress walked among them. Ms. Heidi has arrived. If it is confirmed that these cultists are not polluted by the black sun, we can only think of a way through hypnotism. Chapter 31 remains. Vanna raised her head and looked at the lady in the black dress who was checking the mental state of some cultists. The lady noticed her gaze and also raised her head and saluted slightly. The other person looks to be in his early 20s, but had a calm temperament that was far more mature than his age. His long black hair was tied up behind his head, and the light blue crystal earrings on his earlobes were swaying, reflecting the light from the gas lamp not far away. Heidi is here too. Was she sent by the city hall? Vanna asked the young guard beside her. No, miss. Heidi happened to be nearby when it happened, and she came straight here when she heard the news. Is there anything wrong with that? No, it's nothing. Although Heidi is an employee of the city hall, she has also had a long-term cooperative relationship with the church. She can just complete the on-site registration after returning. Vanna shook her head and quickly turned her attention back to the matter at hand. She examined the cult priest who died of insanity and casually asked, what else did those cult members who were still able to communicate say? What was the situation at that time? Their language was confusing. Two of them mentioned that the normal sacrificial ceremony had already ended, but suddenly someone caught a sacrificial victim who had escaped near the gathering place, so the messenger decided to sacrifice this victim to the sun god. The guard recalled, the two cultists were standing far away from the altar at the time and did not see the specific scene on the altar. They only said that the victim was pierced through the heart, but not dead, and instead shouted the name of the sun god, and directly designated the messenger as the sacrifice. As a result, the messenger was sacrificed. A person who was chosen as a sacrifice shouted the name of the evil god on the spot, and directly sacrificed the person presiding over the ceremony? Vanna seemed to have heard something out of the ordinary, and felt it was extremely absurd. However, these words came from the mouth of a strictly trained, loyal and reliable church guardian, so she had to face it seriously, which made her expression strange. How could such an outrageous thing happen? If this is possible, then wouldn't many victims at the cult sacrifice site be able to kill those heretical priests just by talking faster? Who says it's not true? Even the most incompetent priests are in an absolutely dominant position when presiding over the ceremony. How could a weak, ordinary person's words cause the ceremony to go out of control to that extent? Moreover, we have examined this priest and found that he did have traces of being eroded by projections from the deep layer of the world. He is a real baptized. According to the description of the cultists at the scene, he was holding a ritual dagger with a blessing in his hand. The young guardian shook his head as he spoke, then walked over to another corpse nearby. But, take a look at this. This is the sacrifice that killed the priest. Vanna glanced at the guardian before her eyes fell on the lifeless body. The next second, her sight became sharp. He was a thin young man, so thin that his body's shape was closer to that of a teenager. The most obvious abnormality on his body was the big empty hole in his chest. He has been sacrificed. Yes, this is a sacrifice that has already been offered. Judging from the traces at the scene, and the confessions of the cultists, this sacrifice may have lost its heart before it was pushed onto the stage, the guard said in a serious tone. So, the real situation at that time was that a walking corpse walked onto the stage in full view of the public and killed the priest presiding over the ceremony as a sacrifice. A trick of the necromancer? Vanna muttered to herself as she pondered. No, the power of the Black Sun has a great restraint on the necromancer. The zombies they control can't just walk up to the Black Sun's totem. Are they the resurrected ones who are abnormally controlled? Have you checked the lights around here? She suddenly raised her head and looked at the guard beside her. Is there any completely dark underground space within 500 meters? We checked and found no lightless crypts. Even the cultists knew the dangers of lightless crypts. They left torches and oil lamps in the caves where the bodies were discarded. They were very cautious in this regard. Vanna did not speak for a moment, but bent down in front of the young man's body with deep doubts. She carefully examined this sacrifice who had sacrificed a transcendent in public and caused the ceremony to completely get out of control. She reached out to turn over the other stiff eyelids, trying to find clues of some heretical power on his body. Suddenly, there seemed to be a glimmer of light in the corner of her eye. She seemed to see the young man's corpse slightly open his eyes, and a faint green flame jumped in the empty eyeballs. A tiny spark burst out at the tip of her outstretched right index finger, and then quickly dissipated in the wind. Vanna's eyes flashed, and she instantly took out the dagger from her waist with her left hand. Without hesitation, she cut off her right index finger, then nailed the dagger into the forehead of the corpse with her backhand. The priest's dagger engraved with runes suddenly burst into flames and completely devoured the corpse. It took her less than a second to accomplish all this. At the moment the corpse was engulfed by flames, she had already stood up and taken 2 steps back. Then she took out the blessed holy oil from her waist, bit off the cork with her teeth, and poured the oil inside on her right hand, which was bleeding madly. As soon as the holy oil touched the flesh and blood, large amounts of white smoke hissed out. A piercing pain surged up, but the expression on Vanna's face did not change at all. She saw that the guard who had been following her had quickly drawn the steel sword at his waist and cut off the head of the burning sacrifice with one sword, and then threw a potion mixed with seaweed extract and silver powder into the flames. Accompanied by continuous explosions and flames that suddenly rushed up into the sky and almost licked the ceiling, the alienated corpse turned into ashes in the blink of an eye. However, the fierce fire did not spread to the other corpses nearby. The guards around had already reacted. Half of them instantly drew out their rune steel swords and surrounded Vanna, while the other half drew out their large-caliber revolvers and quickly formed a guard on the periphery. The two priests on the scene also drew out their revolvers hidden under their robes, blessed the muzzles of their guns with incense burners while chanting the name of the storm goddess Gemona, and kept pointing their guns at the crazy cultists who were agitated by the changes in the surrounding environment. "Your Excellency the Judge." The young guard holding a steel sword came to Vanna at this time. "How are you? Just now there is some kind of power remaining in the body of that sacrifice, and this power has bypassed all the protections given to me by the goddess, even bypassing my psychic alerts." Vanna waved her hand and looked at her right hand. The goddess's gift took effect, and the index finger that was cut off by the dagger was wriggling and recovering little by little. But even though she felt the severe pain gradually dissipating, her heart was not at peace at all. Something is wrong. There is not only the Black Sun here, but there may be another powerful force that visited this sacrificial ceremony, and this force has not completely left. It still has other plans. The Inquisitor made a quick judgment. Transfer all the witnesses and evidence to the church and keep them under strict supervision. All inspections and interrogations will be conducted in the church. The scene here must be thoroughly purified. Is there anyone else somewhere else? A guard nearby immediately answered, "Yes. We have previously rescued a group of imprisoned predetermined sacrifices in another cave nearby. They are now temporarily placed in the pipeline room next to it. Take them away as well. Take them to the church. Even though they are victims, they must undergo strict inspection before they can be released home," Vanna said quickly, and then she seemed to suddenly remember something. "Where is Amiss? Heidi. Is she okay?" "I'm here," a calm female voice sounded nearby. The psychiatrist in a black dress employed by the city hall walked over slowly and nodded to Vanna. "Don't worry, I didn't react at all just now. So what happened?" As many classic stories say, the cultists provoke something more evil than themselves. Vanna glanced at the psychiatrist. "I strongly suggest that you take an extra layer of protection when examining these cultists and hypnotizing them, and the future powers that shouldn't have appeared here have appeared, and they are still remnants." Chapter 32 Breakfast on the Lost Home. As the night faded, the pale scars that occupied the entire sky also gradually dissipated. Duncan stood on the poop deck and looked up at the sky, not letting go of any details of the alternation between day and night. He saw that the scar gradually became transparent and illusory, like a dream that was waking up. The gray-white light mist that escaped around it first merged with the sky, and then it was the body of the scar, and during the whole process, however, the location of the scar has never changed. Duncan blinked, and further speculation faintly appeared in his mind. The trace in the sky has not changed its position. Does it mean that it is not some kind of distant astronomical structure? Does it mean that it is just some kind of phantom imprinted in the background of the atmosphere, which will move synchronously with the infinite sea? Or is it because the planet on which the Great Sea is located, if it is really a planet, and the scar just keep running in sync? Or maybe the scar was actually moving, but the observation time was too short to detect with the naked eye. All sorts of conjectures keep coming and going in his mind, but Duncan is very clear that before there is sufficient evidence and reliable experimental verification, these conjectures are just conjectures. There are thousands of possible explanations behind a natural phenomenon, but there is no theory and evidence to support it. Everything is empty talk. The sun has risen. The first is the golden radiance emerging from the sky, and the sea, followed by a huge luminous structure suddenly emerging from the sea, accompanied by brilliant rays of light. The light body ball locked by the double rune structure appeared in Duncan's field of vision. Under the slow movement of the rune structure, the sun rose majestically. There seems to be a certain sound in this majestic process. A certain low, powerful, and slow roar reverberated in Duncan's mind illusorily, but when I listened attentively, the voice suddenly disappeared. He frowned, wondering if he had an auditory hallucination just now, but the memory brought by that voice was so vivid that he couldn't deny it at all. Is that the sun's announcement to the world as it rises? Or is it just one of the many illusions brought about by the boundless sea? No one can answer Duncan's doubts, and the vast and boundless sea keeps all the secrets as always. Pigeon Eye squatted comfortably on Duncan's shoulder as usual, then it stood up suddenly, flapped its wings vigorously, and yelled loudly while looking at the sea. "Order French fries. Order French fries." Duncan couldn't help laughing. He took a look at this weird pigeon, and suddenly felt that it was not bad to have such a bird thing. The strange words that the pigeon made from time to time always made him feel a little hometown intimacy. "It's a pity that there are no French fries on board." He fiddled with the pigeon's beak and turned to the direction of the captain's cabin. "But you are right in one sentence, you need to get something to eat." A few moments later, the captain of the Lost Home prepared a traditional ghost ship breakfast for himself in the captain's room. Duncan directly used the nautical table as a dining table, and put a few plates on the empty table next to the chart. Today's breakfast, like yesterday's dinner, yesterday's lunch, and every meal in the past, it was dried meat, cheese, and plain water. Duncan sat in front of the nautical table and laid out the napkin for himself seriously and ritually. The goat's head was quietly opposite him. On his left was the cursed doll Alice, who came to say hello early in the morning. The odd pigeon squatted on the table to his right. Duncan suddenly felt that this scene began to fit his personality as the ghost captain. The goat wood carving representing the devil, the cursed doll that could not be discarded, the talking bird who knew the knowledge of the other world, and sitting on the main seat Captain Ghost. This film can be used as the cover of the movie without repairing it. However, only the person involved knows the current situation of the food on the Lost Home. Duncan sighed and looked down at the things on the dinner plate. The opening scene like a movie poster is over, and the real life on the Lost Country is next. He picked up the table knife and cut it hard on the cheese. There was a creaking sound when the hard object rubbed against it. He poked the jerky next to him with the fork, and the jerky collided with the plate, making a crisp jingle sound. Alice looked at this scene curiously, and finally couldn't help asking, "Captain, is today's meal the same as yesterday's?" "Tomorrow will be the same." Duncan looked up at the cursed doll. "Do you want to try?" Alice thought for a while, picked up a piece of jerky with her hand, put it into her mouth and chewed it hard twice, then spit it out. "It's not delicious at all." "It's so delicious that you can't finish it. Do you have a stomach?" Duncan reached out and took the remaining half of the jerky in Alice's hand. "If you want to try it, you really want to try it." As he said that, he looked at the food on the plate with some worry. "These are the only foods that can be found on the boat. The jerky tastes like cardboard with salt, and the cheese is like loose firewood mixed with sand, and no matter how it is handled, it has a strange smell." He has also tried boiling jerky or roasting, frying, but no effort to improve the texture and taste of these things. The good news is that these foods are at least not corrupt and will not poison people to death. The bad news is that the power of time has still turned these non-perishable substances into a state that is extremely unrecommended to swallow. Duncan has every reason to believe the cheese was several rounds older than himself, and those jerky had at least witnessed a century of ups and downs if they were still alive. The captain of the Lost Country may not have to worry about scurvy, but Duncan still yearns for a healthy diet. At least, he hopes that the food on his plate will be a little younger than himself. The same age is fine. The replenishment plan for the Lost Homelander and land exploration plan that I had planned in my mind yesterday came to my mind again. But none of this will be achievable in the short term. Duncan sighed and continued to cut the firewood on the plate with a gesture of revenge. AI, who had tilted his head on the table next to him and watched for a long time, walked over curiously. The bird first glanced at his master and looked at the things on the plate. Insufficient crystal ore reserves? Duncan glanced at the pigeon, casually squeezed some fallen cheese crumbs, and threw it to it. AI lowered his head and pecked twice, then immediately froze and stood there as if suddenly dead. The bird froze for 3 or 4 seconds before it suddenly moved. It flapped its wings and flew to the shelf next to it, making a distraught voice. "I'm starving to death today. If you jump here, you won't eat it." Duncan felt a little hurt, and Goat's Head, who had been quiet across the table for a long time, finally couldn't help, but started to make the sound of creaking wood. Before the guy got himself a fire, Duncan finally nodded. "Speak up if you have something to say." "Yes, Captain." The Goat's Head got a chance to speak and immediately became noisy. "I've been wanting to ask since yesterday. The one you brought is called AI, right? Why do I always talk to it? Do you not understand? I thought about it all night yesterday. What does it mean to recharge Q coins?" Duncan immediately raised his eyebrows. He really didn't expect that the Goat's Head could hold back until now before asking, and he actually underestimated the self-control of this guy. "You don't have to worry about it. This bird's thinking is very weird." Duncan didn't stop the carpentry work in his hand, but made the sound of chiseling, axe and sawing with the knife and fork in his hand, and casually said the excuse he had thought up long ago. "It seems to communicate with people in a language that only it can understand, and after listening to it a lot, you can probably guess what it means." "Is that so?" The Goat's Head began to think, "but I always feel that there seems to be some kind of logic hidden in its words." As if a complete and self-consistent set of knowledge is hidden behind the language you did. You discover AI in the process of walking in the spirit world? Could it be some kind of projection from the deep? As you know, the deeper the place, the more information from the misplaced time and space will emerge in the form of projection come out. There are many lost eras that we have never understood, and even some fragments of the future. Maybe AI is talking about something in another time and space? The cutting work in Duncan's hands paused for a moment at a rate imperceptible to the naked eye, and then everything went on as usual, and at the same time he said in a flat tone, "Then I hope you can sum up the logic behind I's language as soon as possible." Goat's Head's words may be a random guess, but the information revealed in it inevitably caused waves in Duncan's heart. In the process of walking in the spirit world, his soul approached the deeper layer of this world. In the deeper place, the more you will see the projection from the misplaced time and space. Are those projections even possible, showing scenes from different timelines? Duncan didn't see any landscapes in different timelines when he was walking in the spirit world, but Goat's Head said something right. AI is indeed from another time and space. So, was this pigeon brought to this world by a human named Zhu Ming, or did it really come from a deeper layer of this world, as Goat 2 said? Chapter 33 Fish. This breakfast tasted like wax, and tasted worse than wax. After a not-so-satisfying breakfast, Duncan's mood did not improve at all as his stomach was filled. Instead, he became a little annoyed because some of the information that Goat had inadvertently mentioned triggered a bunch of messy guesses. He looked at AI, the pigeon strolling leisurely on a nearby shelf, and felt that the fanciful thoughts in his mind were becoming more and more outrageous. He has always believed that this pigeon that speaks Earth language was born because it has the soul of an Earth human. He believes that when he was walking in the spiritual world, the individual Zhu Ming reacted with the brass compass, giving birth to a strange bird like AI. But what if that's not the case? What if, as Goat Head said, this pigeon was just some kind of phantom that ran out from a deeper place and then happened to condense into a form next to him? Then the Earth language that AI occasionally uttered had nothing to do with Zhu Ming's memory, but became a projection of a certain period of history recorded by this world itself. The possibilities behind this disturbed Duncan. Alice stood up, and her voice interrupted Duncan's wandering thoughts. "Do you need me to wash the dishes?" Duncan looked at Miss Doll in surprise, and the latter scratched her hair awkwardly. "I think since I'm already on the ship, I should find something to do, otherwise I'll be like a freeloader." "But you don't even eat," Duncan reminded her. "But it's a good idea that you have this intention. Take the dishes to the bathroom, and talk to the sink. If it doesn't mind, you can wash them." After saying this, he stood up without waiting for Alice to reply, and walked towards the door of the captain's room while saying casually, "I'm going to patrol the deck. Don't disturb me if you don't have anything else to do." The pigeon that was walking on the shelf immediately fluttered onto Duncan's shoulder and left the room with him, leaving Alice staring at the Goat Head in front of the navigation table. "Is the captain in a bad mood?" After hesitating for a moment, Alice asked Goat Head cautiously. The Goat Head said in a deep tone, "The captain's mood is like the weather in the vast ocean. Don't speculate, just accept it." Alice didn't wait for the Goat Head to continue speaking before quickly asking, "By the way, the captain just asked me to discuss this with the pool. How do we discuss it?" "It's simple. If you go to wash something and get splashed with water, it means the sink doesn't like you. By the way, can you wash dishes? If not, I have some theoretical experience." Before Goat Head finished speaking, Alice quickly cleared the tableware and rushed to the door, shouting, "No need, I will learn." "Thank you, Mr. Goat Head, goodbye." The captain's room suddenly became quiet, leaving only the black Goat Head on the table, staring with empty eyes in the direction where everyone left. After a long while, a sigh came from the navigation table. "I wish I had legs." Then its eyes returned to the chart. The fog around the lost homeland was still slowly dissipating, and the captain's assigned task of steering the ship still had to be completed well. Under precise control, this huge and living ghost ship sensitively adjusted the angles of each sail and continued to sail on this boundless sea. Goat Head hummed a ship song that had been passed down from who knows when. The rough and hoarse humming that sounded like noise echoed in the captain's room. Sails hoisted, sails hoisted. The sailor who left home kept on going. In the storm and the noise, we are only a plank away from death. Take the jib, spread the mainsail, let go the cables, hold on to the gunwale. We are in the middle of the sea. Stay away from the fish, stay away from the fish. The sailor must cross the route where the offspring are entrenched. Stay away from the fish, stay away from the fish. We want to reach the shore safely. Strong wine and stove are just ahead. Duncan walked around the warehouse where supplies were stored, then around the kitchen, and finally returned to the deck in the middle of the lost homeland. No matter how much he searched, he couldn't find anything on the ship that tasted better than jerky and cheese. The good news was that he didn't have to eat maggot-infested biscuits like the sailors on Earth in the Age of Sail had to do. The bad news was that there weren't even any maggot-infested biscuits on this ship. He put aside his previous random thoughts for the time being and brought the quiet AI to the edge of the deck. Looking out at the boundless sea, he kept thinking, no matter what, I have to find a way to replenish the necessities of life on the lost homeland. Although I can't be too particular about the quality of life on a ghost ship, I can't really live like a ghost after all. Alice might need a change of clothes, and there's nothing suitable for her on board. We must establish contact with the city-states on land as soon as possible. The lost homeland has been drifting on the sea for too many years. The city-states on land may have developed to a level that even the goat-headed man could not have predicted during this period. From what we saw in the sewer before, at least the planned city-state is a strong and advanced city. The revolvers carried by those cultists can also illustrate the technological development of human society. An ancient ghost ship may not be invincible in the face of a civilized society that has developed for a century. The lost hometown still has its power, but if it is just its power, it will be difficult to deal with it. Duncan glanced at AI over his shoulder. Maybe I should recharge my energy today and try the spiritual world walk again. Goo-goo? AI tilted his head and finally made some normal pigeon-like movements. Duncan couldn't help but smile, and at this moment, he suddenly noticed out of the corner of his eye that there seemed to be a flash of light on the nearby sea. His attention was attracted by the movement, and he subconsciously looked over the side of the boat a few more times. Then he noticed that there seemed to be something swimming under the water nearby. After hesitating for a moment, Duncan suddenly slapped himself on the forehead. Hey! My reaction. We are in the sea. Aren't there fish in the sea? The sudden emergence of possibility made Duncan's mood instantly improve. He realized that establishing contact with the land and providing a stable supply of materials to the lost homeland would not be accomplished overnight, but couldn't the vast ocean itself be of some help? There are fish in the sea, and he's had enough of the jerky and cheese on the ghost ship. Duncan's enthusiasm was aroused. He remembered that there were heavy fishing rods for sea fishing in a warehouse below the deck, and there was a place to fix the fishing rods on the side of the ship at the edge of the deck. As for the bait, I wonder if the dried meat and cheese will work? Just like that, the cursed doll was washing dishes in the water room, the talking goat head was concentrating on driving the boat, and the captain of the lost homeland was busy between the deck and the cabin. Duncan quickly found what he wanted. He carried 3 heavy fishing rods and some bait back to the deck, and fixed these things to the edge of the boat in a rather unfamiliar manner. After putting on the bait and casting the rod, he moved an empty bucket from nearby to serve as a chair while waiting. Duncan actually had no experience in sea fishing. All his fishing experience was limited to ponds and a small river in his hometown. He didn't know whether his impulsive action would really catch any fish, but he had nothing to do anyway, so what if? Just treat it as a rest before the next journey into the spirit world, and at the same time, you can also keep looking forward to future improvements in food. Duncan sat down between several fishing rods. During the long wait, his mood gradually calmed down. The sea conditions today are relatively calm, and there are some clouds in the sky, but there are no signs of a storm. Duncan sat on the barrel, his back against a capstan used to fix the cable, and squinted his eyes as the ship swayed slightly. At some point, he fell into a state of half-sleep and half-wakefulness. He dreamed that he was walking barefoot on the calm sea. The water was blue and the sun was warm. The familiar and normal sun in my memory hangs high in the sky, bright, but not scorching. He heard the sound of splashing water and looked in the direction of the sound, only to see a fish suddenly jumping out from the calm water nearby. It was a group of golden little fish which looked only as big as a palm. They blew bubbles in the air and wagged their tails, slowly circling around Duncan as if they were swimming in water. These fish swimming in the air came closer little by little. Juming looked at them curiously, looking at their round eyes, their dense scales, their opening and closing mouths, and the fine lines like water waves that were floating slightly behind them. Juming suddenly thought these fish were very beautiful and very fragrant. It must be very, very fragrant. Chapter 34 Harvest. A sudden sound of waves woke Duncan from his dream. He suddenly opened his eyes, and the illusion he had seen in his half-asleep state had only left some faint silhouettes. He only remembered that he saw fish swimming in the air, and the fish surrounding him seemed particularly delicious. But what did those fish look like? Can fish swim in the air? Duncan blinked his eyes. A strange feeling of the tearing and blending of reality and dreams made him a little confused for a moment. He looked at the 3 fishing rods fixed on the fishing rod rack, and saw no signs of any fish being hooked. The sea in the distance had begun to rise and fall, and wave after wave was hitting the hull of the lost hometown. Then, the waves grew bigger, within a range visible to the naked eye, and one wave stronger than the other began to surge in from the distance continuously. The huge hull of the lost hometown was shaking in the wind and waves, and the sound of surging waves filled the ears. Duncan looked up at the sky and found that the weather was still good. There seemed to be just a few more winds and waves, but there should not be any extreme weather phenomena such as a big storm. This might not be a good day for fishing, he muttered to himself, considering whether he should put away the fishing rods. But at this moment, out of the corner of his eye he suddenly saw the front end of one of the fishing rods suddenly bend. The strong fishing line prepared for sea fishing instantly tightened, and the short, thick and tough sea fishing rod seemed to have caught something big. The entire front half suddenly bent like a bow, accompanied by a harsh creaking sound. The fishing rod rack, used to fix the fishing rod, also made a sound of wood rubbing under the huge force. All of this conveyed a signal to Duncan: the fish are coming. Big fish. He instantly gave up the idea of putting away the rod and taking a rest. The enthusiasm of the fisherman was burning in his chest. He took 2 steps to the shipping fishing rod, grabbed the fishing rod with one hand to prevent it from falling off the fishing rod rack, and began to adjust the tightness of the fishing line little by little with the other hand. That's what I told you. How could I be Air Force? Duncan talked to himself excitedly and began to struggle with a giant creature at the other end of the fishing line. It was a difficult fight. The thing at the end of the fishing line obviously had no intention of giving up. A huge force was pulling on the fishing rod. Even with Duncan's strength and the support of the fishing rod stand, the stalemate still seemed shaky. The wind and waves around the lost homeland grew stronger and stronger, but for Duncan, this little shake was nothing. He was just irritated by the stubborn prey and was worried that the opportunity to improve the food, which had finally come to him, would slip away. The tension of the fishing line had reached a critical point, and the big fish was about to escape from his hands. After an unknown amount of time in the stalemate, Duncan finally made up his mind, and a cluster of dark green flames suddenly spread out from his hand holding the fishing rod. The green fire burned fiercely, spreading like water, and quickly flowed along the fishing rod and fishing line. The spiritual fire burned all the way, forming a fire line along the fishing line that went straight into the sea. The next second, an illusory green flame outline suddenly emerged in the deep sea around the lost hometown, and under the reflection and outline of the green flame, a huge shadow emerged in the sea. The shadow, like a swelling and shrinking mass of flesh, almost covered the entire sea surface within a few hundred meters around the lost homeland. Extending from its edge were a large number of constantly changing and growing dark creatures, which seemed to be wriggling and waving in the ocean like thousands of arms, stirring the sea water around the lost homeland and controlling the invisible waves to rise and fall. Duncan heard some strange noises coming from the sea. While maintaining a stalemate with his prey, he leaned out to take a curious look. He saw nothing but the rising and falling waves, which were not much different from before. Moreover, he clearly felt that the resisting force coming from the fishing rod was a little weaker than before. His prey was beginning to lose strength, a fact that brought a huge smile to his face. He began to tighten the fishing line, dragging his prey out of the sea little by little. Alice was startled by the roar and whistle coming from outside the cabin. The violent shaking came from under her feet, causing the furnishings in the cabin to make a series of clanging noises. She quickly grabbed a nearby railing to prevent herself from falling. A look of doubt appeared on her face. What happened? The lost homeland was shaking, as if a huge storm was raging outside. There was also some strange, low and suppressed sound coming from the depths of this ancient ghost ship, as if it was roaring and raging, fighting against the horror brought by the deep sea, and fighting against some huge beast that was trying to devour it. All kinds of things in the cabin were making clanking noises. At first, Alice thought that these were all collisions caused by the shaking of the ship, but she soon discovered that many of the things making these noises were actually making noises in the same place. They were making sounds to communicate with each other. But Alice could not understand this language that only the lost homeland could understand. She only knew that something might have happened outside. Miss Dull decided to go to the deck to take a look. She stumbled out of the cabin, holding onto the nearby wall to avoid falling, and ran towards the deck. After being almost tripped by the flying ropes and the rushing barrels several times, she finally reached the end of the stairs. She pushed open the wooden door that was swaying in the wind and waves and saw astonishing huge waves rising on the vast sea. The sky was as dark as ink, and the ominous thick clouds had almost condensed into a heavy mass. The clouds were darkly approaching the sea surface, and huge waves like city walls were rolling and surging under the dark clouds, rising and falling near the lost hometown as if surrounding it. This was the first time Alice had seen such a scene. She didn't know if this was a normal situation at sea, but she knew she had to find the captain at this time. She looked around the deck and easily found Captain Duncan standing on the edge of the deck. The wind and waves around were a bit annoying, but for Duncan, who was about to succeed, these were just insignificant disturbances. With the dual feedback of the fishing line and the green fire, he could clearly feel that his prey had stopped resisting, and the behemoth was being pulled out of the water little by little. "Come up." He gave a shout of delight and gave the rod one last tug. A huge fish jumped out of the sea, really huge, almost half the size of him. In this brief moment, Duncan's eyes met with the fish in midair. "It's pretty ugly." This was the first feeling in his heart. It was indeed an extremely ugly fish. The surface of its dark body seemed to be covered with some kind of bumpy growths, and there were strange gray-white patterns spreading randomly along the fins on both sides. Many bone-like structures could be seen at the position of the fish head, and a pair of hollow white eyeballs were staring at Duncan under those bone spurs. Duncan felt very uncomfortable. He even felt that the fish was looking at him with ill intentions. But the next second, he saw the fish twitch suddenly, and its eyeballs that were looking at him burst out of thin air for some reason, and blood gushed out instantly. The fish fell heavily onto the deck, jumping and twisting wildly as if struck by electricity, and fell silent after just a few seconds. Blood seeped out of its mouth and burst eyes, dripping onto the deck drop by drop. Duncan looked at the ugly fish with some surprise as it quickly lost its life at his feet. He vaguely remembered what he had read in books. Most deep-sea fish are indeed ugly, and because they live in a water pressure environment for a long time, their blood vessels will rupture due to pressure changes after being fished out of the sea, and they may even die quickly as a result. Is it like this for the fish in this world as well? Just as he was stunned, a crackling sound suddenly came from him. Duncan looked in the direction of the sound out of curiosity, only to see several smaller strange fish also landing on the deck. They looked similar to the strange fish that was half a man's height, but were only about half a meter in size. And like the big fish when Duncan saw them, they were already bleeding violently all over their bodies, and soon they were dying. Duncan was a little stunned, and it took him a long time to react. The Calabash brothers saved Grandpa? One by one. Alice held tightly onto the railing beside her, nervously watching the brutal fight not far away that was enough to drive an ordinary person crazy. She saw Captain Duncan standing on the edge of the deck, with dark green flames blazing on his body. He was facing the sea like a flaming giant. 3 hooks extended from the deck under his feet, and one of the hooks was burning with a terrible flame. She saw a huge shadow suddenly appear in the boundless sea, and then a tentacle almost thicker than the main mast of the lost homeland stretched out from the sea. Countless malicious eyes opened on the face of the tentacle, and countless sharp teeth rubbed and chewed between the eyes, as if it would bite the entire ship into pieces in the next moment. Alice almost screamed out loud. She wanted to remind the captain to dodge and rushed over to help, but before she could act, the tentacle fell towards the captain. She saw Captain Duncan raise his head. Under the blazing flames, there was a look of joy of harvest on the captain's face. He was looking at the countless eyes on the tentacles, and the countless eyes on the tentacles were also looking at him. The next second, all the eyes on the tentacles suddenly exploded, and hundreds of sharp fangs let out shrill and painful screams. Then, the tentacle broke out of thin air, as if a huge entity hidden under the sea level had actively cut off the connection with the tentacles, and abandoned the severely damaged ends of the tentacles directly on the deck. The tentacle fell to the ground with a thud, and the dirty, sticky flesh and blood that spilled from the broken end also fell to the ground with a crackling sound, landing at the captain's feet. Chapter 35 Calm and Normal. The sea calmed down. Alice saw the tentacles fall on the deck, and some kind of powerful flesh and blood fragments also fell at the captain's feet. The vitality quickly faded from these flesh and blood, and at the same time, around the lost homeland some kind of behemoth entrenched under the sea water also began to speed up its dive, paying a tentacle arm as the price. It quickly left the sea area where the lost homeland was located, and it even looked like it was in a panic. Flee! In the process of this huge shadow rediving into the deep sea, the sea returned to calm at an astonishing speed, and the dark cloud in the sky that looked like deep ink also completely dissipated. That might not be a cloud at all. Alice looked up at the sky. She still remembered the appearance of the cloud before. She recalled the outline of the cloud when it dissipated, and finally vaguely matched it with the shadow under the water around the boat before. The thick cloud in the sky seemed to be a shadow cast on the sky by some colossal creature in the sea. The sound of crackling flames came from the edge of the deck, interrupting Alice's distraction. She hurriedly looked in the direction of the captain, only to see that the captain had returned to his usual appearance. This tall man had a smile on his face. With a happy smile, he had already noticed Alice standing not far away, so he waved his hand to signal Miss Puppet to go. Seeing Alice walking in front of him, Duncan kicked the big fish on the deck, with a slightly raised tone. "Look, I caught a big fish." Big fish? Alice's expression was a little dull. She looked at the mass of things at Duncan's feet. Among the twisted and rolled flesh, countless bloody eyes were still half closed. The posture is staring at the sky, and the bony fangs glow with a metallic cold light between the eyeballs. With Duncan's kick, Half of the eyes on the broken tentacle suddenly blinked, but then they all closed. "Yeah, fish," said Duncan cheerfully. "You see, it took me a lot of work to get this thing up." Even though it was just a puppet, Alice still felt as if a muscle in the corner of her eye trembled at this moment. She opened her mouth to speak, but she didn't know where to start to correct this topic. She looked at the fish at Duncan's feet. A large, ugly fish lay there, black in color, with pitted skin, strange off-white patterns near the fins, bone spurs extending from its head, and a pair of lifeless fish eyes meeting her gaze. There are also many little fish scattered around the deck. Alice suddenly lost all expressions and words. She stared wide-eyed at the scene in front of her, at the fish lying on the deck, and at these things that were not fish just a second ago. Miss Doll, who lacks life experience, still doesn't understand what it means to doubt life, but at this moment, she indeed suddenly has doubts about everything, and she even wonders if she is dreaming that tentacle. Where did those flesh and blood fragments go? Perhaps her momentary sluggishness was too obvious. Duncan immediately noticed Alice's abnormality. He raised his eyebrows and looked at the doll. "What's wrong? Is there something wrong?" Alice opened her mouth, but just as she was about to open her mouth to correct something, the rules that the goats had told her before suddenly came to her mind. On the Lost Country, Captain Duncan is the absolute authority, and his words are absolute facts. If the real world is contrary to Captain Duncan's words, then the captain's judgment shall prevail. "There is no problem." Alice reacted suddenly and said quickly, and then, as if trying to cover up the overly tense part of her tone, she quickly changed the subject. "By the way, Captain, the storm just now was really scary." "Storm? You mean that wave?" Duncan looked at Miss Puppet suspiciously. "That wave is indeed not small, but it's far from being called a storm." "But yes, you haven't seen any real storm." "Alice, you're right. Captain Duncan called the storm that covered almost the entire sea area a wave, so it is a wave. And Captain Duncan thinks that the things he caught on the boat are fish, then these things are fish." "I feel a little nervous. Are you really okay?" Duncan still noticed something wrong in Alice's tone, and he looked at his crew one with some concern. "Could it be seasick?" "Are you seasick?" "I'm fine, but the boat shook a little just now." Alice looked at the concerned captain in front of her eyes, but she didn't know whether she should feel relieved or more afraid, so she could only change the subject abruptly. "By the way, what are you planning to do by catching these fish?" "Is there even a need to ask?" Duncan suddenly laughed. "Of course it's food." Alice's expression froze for a moment. "Eat? Otherwise? Didn't you find that the food reserves on the Lost Home were too monotonous?" Duncan was obviously in a good mood. "I plan to take apart the big one, stew part and roast part, and use these slightly smaller ones. Salt it and make it into dried fish." He happily talked about his next plan, but although he was very confident in his mouth, he was actually not sure whether he could succeed. In the end, his cooking skills were only average, and he had no experience in handling such huge sea fish, and the technique of making dried fish only has a little theoretical knowledge, without the slightest practical experience. "But how do you know if you don't try? The only problem is not to ruin your stomach." Duncan still retained some sanity in the joy of the harvest. He carefully looked at the big fish at his feet, guessing whether this gift from nature would be poisonous. The safest way is to find an unlucky person to try first. He first thought of the goat's head in the captain's cabin, then ruled out this option in an instant, and then glanced at the cursed puppet opposite. This puppet was also not feasible. Alice has no stomach at all. Finally, he looked at the pigeon on his shoulder. The pigeon also tilted its head to look at him. He doesn't look like a normal creature, but if you have to find a living creature with flesh and blood on the boat, it seems that this pigeon is the only one left. After a while, Duncan left the deck with his harvest. Lunchtime was approaching, and he couldn't wait to improve the food on the Lost Country. Alice stayed where she was for a while, and then came to the door of the captain's cabin. She didn't intend to come looking for the goat's head, since she saw the nagging ability of this first mate last time. She even felt a deep sense of awe for the entire captain's cabin. Whenever possible, she didn't want to take the initiative to step into the door of the captain's room. But what happened today was so weird that she felt it was necessary to consult the experienced Mr. Goathead to see if it was a normal phenomenon on the Lost Home. She didn't violate the rules of the crew, she just inquired about the situation, so she shouldn't be taboo. After hesitating for more than 10 seconds, Alice finally mustered up the courage and opened the door of the captain's cabin. The next second, she was shocked to see that the goat's head had already turned to the direction of the door, and was staring fixedly at it. It seemed to have been waiting for her to come over. "What's going on outside?" Goat's head said in a very rare and concise manner. Alice sensed something was wrong from the abnormal behavior of the other party. She quickly turned around and closed the door, came to the nautical table, and told the other party everything she saw. And after her words fell, The goat's head fell into an extremely abnormal silence. It didn't say a word for as long as a minute. The wood-carved sheep's head couldn't make an expression, but Alice could clearly feel things seemed to be a bit beyond the judgment of the first mate. Alice became nervous all of a sudden, and she subconsciously leaned forward. Isn't this something that normally happens on the Lost Home? Could it be that the captain really everything is fine on the Lost Home? The goat's head finally woke up from the silence. It quickly replied, interrupting Alice's words as if it wanted to plug some kind of loophole in the first place. Listen, everything on the Lost Home normal, always normal, and the great Captain Duncan as always. Then, I just want to see your reaction. Things are a little bit beyond my expectations, but this is due to my lack of imagination and cognition. The words of the goat head quickly became fluent, and it seemed to be recovering from the stunned state a little bit, and then, its emotions obviously began to rise, and even its tone became passionate and excited. Yes, the great Captain Duncan, he deserves to be greater and stronger. There is nothing unusual, Miss Alice. Listen, Lost Home business as usual aboard. Let the captain do what he thinks is right, and stop discussing this topic. Just remember this fact from today. Lost Homes has fish in its kitchen, and fish is a delicious ingredient. Chapter 36. When day and night alternate, it's not easy to cook such a huge fish for lunch. This is not only a technical job, but even a manual job. Fortunately, the fisherman's sense of mission and his enthusiasm for improving food drive Duncan, so that he can deal with the big fish he caught today with full motivation. He worked in the kitchen for a long time, and finally successfully removed the bone spurs on the head of the ugly monster fish, and then he stumbled and cut its fat fish body into several pieces. The head of the monster fish was really meatless. He temporarily threw it aside, but there were some meaty parts in the belly and back of the fish, which were very suitable to be used as ingredients on the Lost Country. It might seem odd that Captain Didn't was working in the galley himself, but Duncan enjoyed it quite a bit. I just don't know how ordinary people who feared the disaster of the Lost Country would react to this scene, and they would be astonished. The frightened Captain Ghost actually has such an easygoing and lifelike side, or should he admire Duncan's excellent fishing skills first? In the process of cutting the meat of the strange fish into several pieces, Duncan suddenly thought of this question, and he couldn't help laughing in a good mood, thinking that maybe one day in the future, he would kindly invite some people to be guests on board. The Lost Country will not always be synonymous with disaster, and he himself does not intend to be a cold-blooded and ruthless ghost captain. After he has a better understanding of the world, he will naturally integrate with contemporary civilized society. At that time, invite the guests on board to eat fish. After completing the simple division, Duncan temporarily put most of the fish into a wooden barrel covered with sea salt, and then pushed the heavy wooden barrel into the warehouse deep in the kitchen. For processing, when the time comes, they will be pickled and dried on the deck, and if all goes well, they will be dried salted fish in the sea breeze. It's a pity that no spirits were found on board, otherwise there could be more ways to deal with the fish. It is of course a good thing to have fresh fish to eat every day, but Duncan knows that fishing is always a matter of chance. He has a good harvest today, but it may not always be the case in the future. He has to think about how to deal with and preserve the excess food. After all, although the dried meat and cheese stored on the Lost Home had no signs of corruption, he couldn't be sure if it was something special about the Lost Home itself or if there was something unusual about the dried meat and cheese that had finally been caught. It's not a good thing to let it rot. Dried salted fish is at least better than bacon from a century ago, even if it's just a change of taste. Duncan saves the tenderest, best-looking parts and tosses them in the pot with the jerky, which acts as a seasoning in the process. This is a reckless practice. Any real chef will have a blood pressure immediately after seeing Duncan's operation. The most suitable method for these fresh and tender fish meat should be made into fish meat, followed by moderate frying. Duncan himself knows that too, but he's doing it just to be on the safe side. He doesn't dare to eat unfamiliar things caught from the sea casually, although theoretically sea fish don't carry parasites that are harmful to the human body, and he, the ghost captain, should not be afraid of ordinary people. Poison, but what if? In contrast, stewing is the most effective processing option for unfamiliar ingredients. He wants to try this first, and if he confirms that the fish is really edible, he will consider other methods. It was almost mid-afternoon when his belated lunch was finally finished. A bowl of fish soup was served, and the delicious taste whetted Duncan's appetite, but before that, he cautiously forked a piece of fish first, let it cool down, and placed it in front of Pigeon Eye. Pigeons don't eat meat, of course, but Eye is hardly a normal pigeon. Duncan needed to satisfy his curiosity. He had so many things to try aboard the Lost Country. As for what to do if this abnormal pigeon is really poisoned after eating fish, Duncan is actually prepared. First of all, he has processed the ingredients as much as possible, and letting the pigeon try it is just a formality. Secondly, if I's situation is really wrong, he can also use the green fire to pull it into the spirit state immediately. He has tried it before. AI in the spirit state is the same as the feedback from the brass compass, which is equivalent to an item controlled by the fire of the spirit. Disassemble and reassemble and send it to the designated location around him. In this case, the ordinary poison will definitely not take effect. AI tilted his head and watched Duncan's operation. After confirming that the piece of fish was for himself, he first pecked at the table next to him with his beak, and looked at Duncan and the ceiling with both eyes. You melon, are you familiar? Duncan, just say whether you want to eat or not. AI raised his wings, imitating Duncan's tone. You just say whether you want to eat or not. Then it lowered its head and quickly pecked at the cold fish meat. At an astonishing speed, it wiped out the food that didn't look like it was for pigeons in a few strokes. After eating, AI stretched his neck vigorously and then started walking on the table arrogantly. It seemed to be very happy, and after going around in a circle, he returned to Duncan and shouted, "It's delicious. It's delicious." Duncan stared at the pigeon dumbfounded, and for some reason, a sentence of emotion suddenly popped up in his mind. This product is now a combination of pigeon, real fragrance, and repeater in one. The three major elements are complete. It is simply the light of human beings' earth, draw and draw according to the form of the 9 palaces of freedom. I am afraid that it is not this guy who can be regarded as an earthling. After a while, Duncan confirmed that the pigeon did not have any abnormal reactions, and he was completely relieved. The captain of the lost home and his pet just hid in the galley and gorged on food. The fish was really delicious, just like what Duncan had seen in his dream. The setting sun is gradually approaching the high walls on the edge of the city, and the towering chimneys, pipes and towers of the Pratland city-state are being bathed in pale golden brilliance little by little. In the central area of the city, the high ground where the Cathedral of the Storm is located, heard the resounding sound of the big bell ringing, accompanied by the sharp whistling of the steam rushing out of the pressure relief valve. A large cloud of white mist spewed out from the top of the tower flanking the church, like clouds covering the sky above the plateau, reflecting the golden sunlight from the sea. This is the signal for the alternation of day and night, a reminder that the power of the sun is about to fade rapidly, and the creation of the world is about to take over the dominance of the sky. After this, the order of the world will change from being stable to being shaken, and the influence from the deep layers of the world will be rapidly strengthened as night falls, and this process will continue until the sun rises the next day. In the night, prudent people will choose to stay at home, and those who have to go out should choose to stay in brightly lit places as much as possible. The gas lamp blessed by the priests can dispel the darkness of the night to the greatest extent. Malicious. But in any case, here is at least a prosperous and stable big city-state. Under the shelter of the sacred Cathedral of Storms, even the deepest influence of the world will be suppressed under the critical point of safety, and the occasional abnormal phenomena in the city, it's just an innocuous little problem. Ordinary citizens know how to ensure the safety of their homes. There are also church guards who patrol at night to take over the work of the sheriff to ensure the order of the city after nightfall. But just like no matter how bright a street lamp is, there are always shadows that cannot be illuminated even under the noses of the guardians of the church. There are always fools who yearn for darkness and subversion. They fear and hate the existing things in the world, order, and fanatically looking forward to a beautiful era that even they themselves have never seen. Fortunately, in a city-state where the power of order dominates, these subversives can only curl up in the shadows most of the time. On the edge of the city-state, in the depths of an abandoned sewer entrance, several figures in black robes were huddling in the corner of the room. This used to be a room for the maintenance and management personnel of the sewer to rest temporarily, but now it has been forgotten with the change of urban planning, and the unattended corner has become a safe haven for the cultists after they fled in a hurry. An unsightly lamp. How bright oil lamps were hung on the wall, and the lights were shaking, illuminating several gloomy, fearful and resentful faces. A black-robed man in his 30s was lying on the floor made of rags, clenched his teeth, his face was pale, his breathing was weak and chaotic, and other people were sitting near him. Someone cursed in a low voice, "Those damned church-heen, we lost a large number of compatriots, and the envoy also died in the ceremony." Another person said hoarsely, "How could the sacred ceremony suddenly go out of control? That sacrifice? Obviously because of that sacrifice. He is obviously the minion of Harris." A man in black suddenly made a listening movement, then raised his finger and pointed upward. "It's the sound of the evening bell and the siren. It's going to be night." The black-robed man who was the first to curse had a low voice and looked uncomfortably at the compatriot who was lying on the floor and was obviously in a very bad state. "Damn. I hope he can make it through the night." Chapter 37 Life and Death Rotation. The twilight bell and whistle that represent the alternation of day and night passed through the deep and damp ramps and shafts, echoing faintly in this dark and cramped sewer, and the signal of the approaching night made the cultists hiding in the abandoned lounge they became more depressed. One of them was terribly ill, unexplained terribly ill, and now he was dying in this dimly lit subterranean world. He's still alive, a cultist said hesitantly. He glanced at the compatriot lying on the ground, and saw that the other person's eyes were half opened and half closed, and the eyeballs were slowly rolling in their sockets. This unlucky man, the guy can still hear what's going on around him, but he doesn't have the strength to open his eyes anymore. He's still alive now, another cultist said in a low voice. The twilight bell has already rang, and he can't die in this room. The Lord's protection will bless him to sleep peacefully in the dark. The man lying on the floor twitched his fingers twice. He obviously understood his situation. He didn't want to die just like this. But death has already gnawed at his shadow, and as far as it looks now, his dear son's fellow countrymen have considered moving this hidden danger out of the shelter before the real death comes. An extremely oppressive silence enveloped the room, so that the weak breathing of the dying person became a clearly audible sound. After an unknown period of silence, the black robe who cursed the Church of Storms suddenly broke the silence. Wait a little longer, just wait. At least it won't change immediately when you die. Then wait a little longer. The black-robed cultist with a low voice let go. He glanced at the man who was breathing hard, and couldn't help muttering, but why did he suddenly get sick? Are you sure it's just is it a normal illness? I know him, he runs an antique shop in the downtown area that is closing soon, and the shop is full of fake goods, said a believer who had never spoken much. He was already sick, and his body had never been healthy. It's a good thing, probably because I stayed in the sewer for too long, and I was frightened before, which made my condition worse. Hearing the explanation of the people next to him, the black-robed cultist with a low voice finally relaxed a little. Although he is not a noble priest, he has also converted to the sun for many years, and now he is somewhat an expert who knows a lot of mystic knowledge. He knows how many long-term and hidden dangers will remain after a failed sacrificial ceremony, and every believer who has participated in that sacrificial ceremony may become the carrier of these hidden dangers. A person who suddenly falls into extreme weakness may be one such vehicle. If it wasn't for the restriction of sons, people are all brothers, and there are a few hard-hearted believers watching, he would have thrown this unlucky guy into the vast darkness outside. After a long silence, the black-robed cultist suddenly moved. He took out a pale golden amulet from his pocket and stuffed it into the chest of the dying compatriot. You are a believer? Next to him asked curiously. I bought this sacred amulet from the envoy at a great price, he said in a low voice, with sincerity in his tone. May the grace of the Lord protect our siblings, and the brilliance of the sun may be able to keep them safe in the dark from further erosion. The two believers next to him immediately had no doubt about him, and looked at the church senior who sent the amulet with admiration. They put their fists between their brows and recited reverently in a low voice, "The people of the sun are all brothers and sisters." The black-robed man with a low voice also clenched his fists between his eyebrows and began to chant in a low voice, "The people of the sun are all siblings." After the sun completely fell below the sea level, the starless and moonless sky once again appeared in front of Duncan, with pale cracks running across the sky, illuminating the boundless sea and the lost homeland sailing on the sea with cold radiance. Duncan stood near the poop deck. He looked back at the sky and sighed slightly. No matter how many times he looked at it, it was impossible for him to see the stars that did not exist in the pale and cold light. But compared to the last time he saw this starless night, he was in a much better mood now. On the one hand, it was because he had accepted the weirdness of this world and was actively adapting to the current life. On the other hand, the fish was really good today. He is a very optimistic person, and any small improvement in his life is a joy to him, not to mention that there are more gifts from nature than he can imagine. At this pace, even if he can't establish a stable connection with the land in a short period of time, he can at least improve the living conditions on this ship. Thinking wildly, he turned his head to look at the pigeon standing on his shoulder, and said casually in a joking tone, "You said, would it be easier for me to do what a pirate captain should do? For example, find a busy the waterway, robbed houses, or something?" The pigeon tilted its head, and its two eyes didn't know where to look. "Does it look like a word? Does it look like a word? That's right. It doesn't fit my personality." Duncan smiled, "And it's easy to say. At least you have to find a channel with merchant ships when you rob a house. The vast sea is empty, and the lost homelander has drifted to a place far away from civilized society. Since the last time it collided with the ship carrying the abnormals 99, he has never seen another ship in sight. I really want to rob and don't know where to find the victim." But at this moment, a voice suddenly came from the side, interrupting Duncan's wild thoughts. "Captain, are we going to rob?" Duncan looked around and saw Alice sitting on a high wooden board next to her, looking at her curiously. Under the light of the pale scar in the sky, The Gothic doll wearing a court dress sat high on the ghost ship, her mercury-like long hair glowed coldly in the night. She sat dignifiedly. There is curiosity in the eyes. This scene is like a classical and mysterious painting. Duncan was a little surprised for a moment. After going through a few realistic trifles that were ups and downs, he almost forgot the elegant and mysterious feeling that the puppet lady brought to him when she first lay in the wooden box. So impressed that he was a little surprised when he saw Alice in a quiet state at this time. Alice didn't know what the captain was thinking. She just asked again curiously, "Captain, are we going to rob?" This sentence is more damaging to her image. Duncan looked at the puppet dumbfounded. "Do you like robbery?" "I don't like it." Alice shook her head. "It sounds boring." "But you were robbed onto the boat by me." Duncan reminded her with a smile. "That's right." Alice thought for a while, nodded and said, and then asked again, "Then are we going to rob now?" "No." Duncan waved his hand and walked unhurriedly towards his captain's cabin. "I also think robbing is quite boring. In contrast, walking is more suitable as an after-dinner exercise." Duncan returned to the captain's cabin. After briefly instructing the goat's head to take charge of the helm, he entered the bedroom as before and closed the door. He has already decided to carry out the second spiritual world walk tonight. But unlike last time, this time he will test this ability with the pigeon eye. A cluster of dark green sparks danced at Duncan's fingertips, and at the moment when the flames jumped, the pigeon that was strolling on the table disappeared in the blink of an eye, and a figure condensed on his shoulder again. Feeling the faint connection between AI and himself, Duncan slowly calmed down, and then he recalled the feeling he had when he activated the brass compass last time, and began to try to use the spirit body in his hand to fire to communicate with Ai. The invisible green flame turned into a thin thread and wrapped around Ai's wings. The next second, the white pigeon was suddenly wrapped in flames. In the burning flames, the feathers of the white dove all turned into illusory forms, and the rising green fire seemed to reshape its flesh and bones. Ai raised his wings in the flames, and the brass compass hanging on his chest it opened with a snap. The dial depicting many mystical runes shimmered, and the pointer in the center pointed straight to the distance. After spinning wildly, the surrounding scenes disintegrated, and the familiar dark space appeared in Duncan's eyes, followed by those familiar streams of light and countless lights dotted around. Duncan looked at those starlights according to the feeling in his heart, looking for the next target suitable for contact. Suddenly, he was attracted by one of the clusters of starlight. He didn't know if this was the Captain Duncan's intuition that the goat's head was always talking about, but he decided to follow this feeling no matter who was behind the starlight. Now, he had a destiny with Captain Duncan. In the abandoned sewers on the edge of the Pulan city-state, the few sun god cultists who had escaped from the church guards by chance were silent in silence. The above-ground world has fallen into deep night, while the underground world has only a cluster of faint lights sheltering abandoned rooms. Even the most brutal and inhuman cultists will feel nervous and terrified in this approaching darkness. The rags next to it are spread on the floor, and the dying person is about to breathe his last breath. Listening to the gradually low and difficult breathing, several pairs of eyes looked at the dying man in unison. They stared at the compatriot on the floor, and everyone knew that it was really impossible for this person to survive the night. In this way, under the gaze of several pairs of eyes, the man on the floor heaved his chest up and down for the last time. He exhaled his last breath in this life. "May the sun continue to shine on your soul in the dark," the black-robed cultist with a low voice said slowly, and then waved his hand. Put him in the next second. His words were suddenly choked back. In front of his eyes, the corpse with its eyes closed was breathing again. "It's time to push the book." The title of the book this time is The Story of My King of Anime is sure enough. It comes from the work of a certain book friend. You can probably guess the content by looking at the name. Just post the introduction. Zia Yu is an ordinary nerd who travels to a parallel world where the ACG culture is very barren with the ACG encyclopedia system, determined to spread the ACG culture throughout the world, so that the banner of the second dimension can be planted all over the world. Starting from Pokemon, various beliefs began to emerge. A new era has come. Chapter 38. Offline. The corpse was breathing, as if it had wandered around the edge of the kingdom of death and then returned to the human world. The black-robed believers in the room stared at this scene in a daze. Some of them didn't even realize that the man in front of them had actually died once just now, because the moment of life and death was so brief that one couldn't even tell the difference unless they paid close attention. They just felt that the breath of their dying compatriot in front of them suddenly became steady and powerful for some reason, which was extremely surprising. The next second, the man lying on the ground opened his eyes. He seemed to have been in the dark for too long, so that the dim oil lamp in the room was dazzling to his eyes. He blinked to adapt to the light, and then his eyeballs slowly moved, as if he had just noticed the three black-robed men gathered around him. Thank God for his protection. A younger black-robed Christian finally reacted and couldn't help but praise excitedly, "You made it. I thought you would wait. Something's wrong. Back off." The cultist with a deep voice suddenly realized something. He stopped the others and stared at the man who had just woken up with a vigilant look. He backed away and said in a threatening tone, "His breathing has completely stopped just now. I'm definitely not mistaken, something's wrong." Duncan finally adapted to the surrounding environment, and the tinnitus-like noise gradually faded from his mind. He saw the figures surrounding him clearly, and his first reaction was, "How come I opened my eyes and saw the same group of people? Why am I still in the sewer?" Walking in the spirit world should be random, and he was choosing targets based entirely on his intuition. He didn't expect that he would end up among these cultists both times he opened his eyes. What kind of bad fate was this? But then, he realized something was wrong from the reactions of the people around him, and the next second, he noticed the black robe on his body. Duncan was silent for 2 seconds, then he suddenly understood. In the last round, he was a sacrifice by the cultists, and then he opened his eyes in the blink of an eye, and now he is a cultist. He really has a connection with this group of people. Something's not right. At this moment, a hostile low voice suddenly interrupted Duncan's confused state of mind after awakening. He looked in the direction of the voice and was immediately met with a cold, vigilant gaze. The owner of that gaze was looking at him coldly, and next to him, the other 2 black-robed believers also reacted belatedly and stepped back to take a defensive stance. Duncan was stunned for a moment, and suddenly realized that he might be possessed by a corpse just like last time. "I am pretending to be dead in front of these cultists." After understanding the situation, the nervous reactions of these cultists became understandable. Duncan's mind started to work quickly. He felt that the numbness and sluggishness remaining in this body had not completely dissipated. It was extremely inconvenient for him to move now. It seemed not easy to cause trouble under the noses of several cultists. He could only think of a way to stabilize these people first, and just as he was quickly thinking of a way out, a bit of fragmented and vague memories suddenly emerged in his mind. In that fragmented and vague memory, he suddenly recalled many fragments of experiences that did not belong to him. He remembered hiding in the sewer, offering the family's money to the messenger of the sun, participating in those dark, crazy, bloody, and sinful rituals to heal his illness, and drinking the blood of innocent people in exchange for the blessing of the sun. At the end of a series of messy memories, he saw the scene of the sacrificial ceremony again. He saw many people wearing black robes like himself standing next to the platform, and a young sacrifice was pushed onto the platform. The young sacrifice had a stiff and weird expression, which made the whole ceremony fall into chaos. He saw the heart of the messenger of the sun being sacrificed, and everyone around the altar went crazy. The believers were killing each other, raging flames flowed from the sun totem, angry roars and empty whispers filled the gathering place, and the original owner of his body and the last few remaining believers fled in panic. Duncan didn't know how long he had been in a daze, perhaps only a moment. The surging strange memories in his mind calmed down again, and a sad and hateful life turned into a series of pale fragments, lying in his heart for people to read like some kind of nutrient. These were the memories of this body's original owner. Although not much remained, there was no doubt about the source. Duncan blinked. This was a change that had not occurred during his last spiritual walk. Last time, he failed to obtain any memory from the possessed corpse, and the brain of the sacrifice was just blank. Why was there such a change this time? Was it because the body he occupied this time was still fresh? Or was it because the pigeon AE strengthened the power of the brass compass? Duncan slowly sat up from the ground. He knew that no matter what the reason behind this change was, now was not a good time to be in a daze. Those nervous cultists had obviously realized that there was something wrong with the resurrection process. As Duncan stood up, the 3 cultists immediately took a half step back. Then the man in the black robe with a deep voice put his hand on his waist and broke the silence. "Don't move, tell me, what's your name?" "Ron," Duncan recalled briefly, and then quite naturally said the name he had just learned from his memory, Ron Strahan. "His name is Ron." A young black-robed cultist on the opposite side immediately lowered his voice and spoke to the black-robed man with a deep voice who seemed to be the leader of the 3 people. However, the man in black robe did not relax his vigilance at all. He just stared at Duncan and suddenly chanted in a strange tone, "In the name of the sun, may the glory of the Lord shine upon us. In the name of the sun, may the blessing of the Lord come upon us." Hearing the sudden crazy noise from the cultist opposite him, Duncan was stunned for a moment, and then he felt a burning sensation in his chest. He subconsciously reached out and took out the thing that was heating up under his clothes, only to see that it was a golden sun amulet. Waves of strange heat were coming from the surface of the amulet. The next second, the amulet suddenly caught fire, and the flames seemed to be full of malice, rushing straight towards Duncan's heart. The glory of the Lord is eating away at him. Seeing this, the cultist who had just recited the prayer reacted instantly. He drew the dagger from his waist and shouted, "His soul has been replaced. Kill this heretic." The other two cultists were obviously a little slower, but they also reacted immediately. These people who thought Duncan was a compatriot just a moment ago drew out their daggers without hesitation, rushed over with murderous intent and shouted loudly, "Kill him." Duncan held the burning sun amulet in his hand and watched three figures rushing towards him. The next second, another figure suddenly appeared at the edge of his sight. A ghostly undead bird with dark green flames burning all over its body tore through the air, sweeping across the roof in a stream of icy flames. It let out a strange shrill cry, and its flapping wings scattered invisible ashes and feather fragments. The three cultists were naturally attracted by the bird of the dead. They subconsciously looked up at Aie, who had transformed into a spirit form. The next moment, all of their movements slowed down, as if the connection between them and the real world suddenly became distant and slow. The three black-robed figures left overlapping afterimages in the air, like a stuttering frame-by-frame animation. They slowly landed on the ground with movements so slow that it was ridiculous, and finally came to a complete stop less than 2 meters in front of Duncan. With great horror in their eyes, they watched the undead bird circle on the ceiling, and then land on the black-robed fellow opposite them. They saw that the sun amulet in the man's hand was still burning, but the next second, the burning flames turned into a faint green, becoming the same shape as the flames on the undead bird. Duncan squeezed the sun amulet in his hand. Green spiritual fire wrapped around the surface of the amulet. The flames gushing out of the amulet circled half a circle in front of him, then calmed down like a pet, and slowly circled on his arm in a flattering manner. Holding the completely occupied and transformed sun amulet, he walked slowly to the three cultists. He looked into their horrified eyes and said with regret, "It would be better if you could pretend that you knew nothing." The next second, the figures of the three cultists suddenly flashed violently several times in the air, and then disappeared. The skeleton-like undead bird wrapped in green fire jumped twice on Duncan's shoulder. Amid the crackling sound of the burning flames, it let out a sharp and hoarse cry. "Oops, the page is gone, try refreshing it?" Chapter 39. The captain steps on the ground. When Pigeon said this, it was as funny, humorous, and silly as ever from the content to the tone. But now it is an undead bird burning with ghostly flames. The translucent flesh is filled with bones and tendons of flames. The ghost that came out screamed. Facts have proof that in many cases, there is not such a big distance between the evil gate and the harmonious gate. The fire of the spiritual body wrapped around Duncan was still burning. He watched the three cultists disappear before his eyes, but he was not sure about the reason behind this process. He only knew that this was the ability of AI. A few seconds later, after confirming that the three cultists really couldn't come back, he turned his head slightly and asked the pigeon on his shoulder, "Where did you get them?" AI flapped his wings and combed his translucent feathers with his mouth. After reacting for a while, he suddenly said, "Back into the shadows." Duncan frowned. He had begun to learn to understand the true meaning of AI's words. "You mean, you exiled them to some kind of parallel space? Or turned them into some kind of untouchable state?" The pigeon raised its head and looked at Duncan with erratic eyes. Cuckoo. It is now pretending to be a real pigeon again. But Duncan believed that he had understood the truth. He pressed his fingers on AI's head, and then looked around the dimly lit shelter again. In the light and shadow of the swaying oil lamp, everything in the small room is clear at a glance. The believers of the sun god who once hid here have completely disappeared from this world. Now standing here, only one body that occupied the cultist descended here, Ghost Captain, and his pigeons. But in the dark, Duncan had a feeling he seemed to feel that the three cultists were still here, beside him. They were trapped in this room, in a certain place that could not be detected and contacted by any means. In the dimension gap, he could even feel those cultists shouting and struggling in vain, and feel the despair that they wanted to reconnect with the real world, but were permanently blocked from reality by the invisible barrier. This feeling permeated invisible, until at a certain moment, Duncan saw the evidence. In a certain shake of the oil lamp on the table, in a certain interplay of light and shadow, he suddenly saw a mark on the nearby wall. It looked like it was left by a dagger slashing hard, but when he looked over again, the flame of the oil lamp flickered again, and the marks on the wall disappeared without a trace. That was the last contact of the three sun believers with the real world. Duncan exhaled lightly, turned and left the room with the pigeon. Outside the abandoned lounge is a corridor that is much narrower than the sewer corridors seen before. The deep and long corridor extends to both sides. One end leads to a fork in the road, and the other end connects to a sloping upward ramp. Even in the abandoned areas, the city managers obviously maintain the most basic maintenance of these underground facilities. At least, The gas lamps on both sides of the corridor are still on. Duncan briefly judged the direction of the corridor, and then sorted out the route to the surface based on the remaining memory fragments in his mind, and quickly walked towards the upward slope. He walked faster and faster. A fresh airflow appeared, and the cool wind blew Duncan's hair head-on. He heard some vague and distant sounds, which seemed to be the roar of some factories and facilities on the surface running all night, and there were even more distant sounds. There was the sound of waves. That was the sound of breaking waves hitting the coastal reefs at night. Duncan almost broke into a trot. The pigeon eerie, who had recovered from the flames of the spirit body, flapped his wings on his shoulders and made a happy voice. "The time is calling. The time is calling." Duncan stopped suddenly and he stared into the eyes of the pigeon. "Don't talk casually outside, normal pigeons can't talk." I thought for a while and flapped his wings vigorously. "Aye, Captain." Duncan was immediately surprised that the pigeon had answered him correctly once, not sure if it was a coincidence or something, but he soon stopped thinking about it. He has to be ready for the world. The black robe on his body must not be worn out. In the memory from swallowing, this suspicious robe is only used in the secret ceremony occasions of the sun god believers, and it is placed on the surface of the city streets. He had to be tied to a tree by 7 or 8 security guards and beat him. A very strict curfew is enforced in the Pulan city-state, and wandering around at night seems to be a very dangerous thing. Ordinary people who want to go out at night must hold a pass and report in advance. The cultist he possesses obviously does not have these laws. Therefore, in order to move around the city, one must avoid those who watch the night. The people responsible for maintaining the order of the city at night are called guardians. They seem to be the armed forces under the Church of the Deep Sea. In the memory of the devoured body, the original owner of this body has deep fear and hostility towards those armed priests. Duncan quickly sorted out the memory fragments in his mind. Since they were inherited from a corpse, most of these fragments were messy and fuzzy. He could not piece together the complete life trajectory of a member of modern civilized society from them, nor could he piece together all the information about the Pulan city-state, but even the most basic part of it is enough for him to have a general idea of what to do next. He first took off the black robe on his body. Before the ramp leading to the surface there were normal clothes under the black robe, and walking outside would not arouse suspicion. He considered whether he should burn the black robe, but the flames and smoke might attract the attention of the night watchman, so in the end he just rolled up the black robe and hid it in a corner near the ramp. The sun talisman is also something that may cause trouble, but it may contain valuable information at the same time. After much hesitation, Duncan decided to take it away. "You can use this talisman to return to the lost homeland when you return. Do a test to see if I can bring it back too. He can study this thing with peace of mind on the lost home." He dealt with the traces of hiding the black robe, and roughly dealt with his appearance, trying to make himself look like an ordinary citizen, not a cult member who was hiding in the sewer and was in a state of embarrassment after finishing this. After everything, he stepped up the ramp. The road ahead is not too far away. Duncan was speeding on the ramp, and the fresher air filled his chest. He could already clearly hear the sound of factories and waves in the distance, and after a few minutes, he even saw a cold light appearing in front of him, on the steps in the distance. He took a few steps forward, and the cold light finally enveloped him completely. He came to the surface. Solid, steady, the earth bathed in a pale twilight. Duncan's eyes widened. He saw a city standing on the boundless sea, representing mortal civilization. A huge scar in the sky traversed the sky above the city, illuminating the row upon row of roofs, towers, and the city beyond. The buildings in front of him are not far away, a slightly dilapidated fringe urban area, and on the higher ground farther away, many distant and magnificent buildings can be seen, which are the cathedral and city hall uptown. Duncan laughed suddenly. He didn't make a sound, but he was out of breath. But after a while, he forcibly stopped his laughter, took a deep breath in the cold night wind, and then strode towards a certain direction in his memory. Cult members also have their own normal lives. Except for a few priests who are completely dedicated to harming the common people, the Church of the Sun, like most other cults, relies on a large number of ordinary people to support their own operations. These bewitched grassroots believers are mostly poor citizens in the lower classes of the city, old people who lack attention, young people who have not experienced much in the world, or like the body Duncan occupies now, an unnoticed, seriously ill, everyday guy who runs a swindling antique store downtown and struggles with life and tax dollars. The awful life of this antique shopkeeper named Ron is over. His debt to some evil god has been wiped out with that last breath, but he still has a place in the world. This position Duncan is very fond of. Chapter 40. Logan Fana woke up from a weird and chaotic dream, and found that the night was still dark. Outside the window the cold and pale light of the creation of the world shone on the window sill, depicting the deep sea runes appearing peaceful and quiet. However, the scene in the weird dream was still clearly reflected in her mind. A big ship burning with green ghost flames, sailed from the boundary line between the sea and the sky and ran over the entire Pulan city-state like a crushing mountain. In the ghost flames, there were countless shouts and desolate songs roared in unison, clamoring as if to overturn the whole world. And at the same time as the giant ship descended, she saw a scorching sun rising from the depths of the city-state of Pure, and not the well-known sun bound by ancient runes, but the sun as described by those sun believers. A burning celestial body like the ancient sun rose from the depths of the city-state, the flames melted the earth, and all the people flowed on the streets like wax figures. The cathedral of the Church of the Deep Sea stood quietly in the center of the purgatory of the melting city of living fire. She prayed to the cathedral in her dreams, hoping to get the guidance of the goddess of the storm, but the cathedral only heard noisy and meaningless bells. No guidance came. Fan Na sat up from the bed and came to the window in her pajamas. She glanced at the still peaceful city outside and the creation of the world in the sky, but the irritability in her heart boiled more and more. After a while, the young judge looked back at the city. She came to the dresser near the bed and opened a drawer. There is a dagger in the drawer of the dressing table. It is a curved ritual dagger. The rune symbolizing the deep sea church shimmers at the base of the blade of the dagger, as if it is being stimulated by an inexplicable force to resonate. Fanna's gaze stayed on those flashing runes for several seconds before she cut a wound on her palm with the blade. As the blood oozed out, she placed her hand across her chest and whispered the words of the storm goddess' name in an attempt to seek guidance from the gods. However, for some reason, she only heard some illusory waves roaring, and the spiritual induction state that she could enter very easily in the past has not moved today. It was as if an invisible veil suddenly enveloped her, blocking the connection between her and the storm goddess Gemona. Fan Na frowned a little bit. The connection between believers and gods is disturbed. This situation is very rare, but it is not unimaginable. The mapping relationship between the subspace and the real world is difficult and complicated, and it is impossible to understand with mortal wisdom. There will also be temporary changes in strength and weakness due to the influence of the subspace, the deep sea, and the spiritual world, coupled with the eternal turbulent disputes between the gods, and between the gods and the ancient gods. Some believers it is also possible to suddenly lose the voice of the god in extremely rare cases. But Gemona, goddess of storms, it shouldn't be like this. The boundless sea surrounds mortal civilization. The power of the storm goddess penetrates all dimensions and affects the entire reality. All gods may lose contact with the real world. Storm goddess, impossible. This is also one of the reasons why the Church of the Deep Sea can become the most powerful church in the boundless sea. The problem lies in yourself. Naturally, Fan Na began to doubt her own state, but when she looked at her palm, she saw that the wound she just made had begun to heal quickly. The blessing from the goddess is still there, and there is no delay in taking effect. Vanna once again recalled the noisy and weird nightmare before, and the ominous omen she had seen in the past many days. There must be a connection between all of this. A ghost ship burning with green flames. A ghost ship. Fan Na quickly recalled and compared the mystic knowledge she had mastered in her mind, and then her eyes suddenly became serious. She is not an expert in the field of navigation, and she is rarely exposed to the absurd and strange stories circulated among superstitious sailors, but even in the Orthodox Church classics, there is a ghost ship that occupies a special position. It was an ominous ship returning from the warp, and its captain was Duncan, the terrifying captain who caused the Isle of Vitherland to be swallowed by the frontier collapse a century ago. Vanna suddenly got up from behind the dressing table, but then she remembered it was late at night, and the archives of the cathedral, like any other library, were closed at night. And from a safety point of view, it is best for her not to talk about the content related to this dream with anyone within a few hours after the dream of omen has just ended. If this dream really points to that Captain Duncan, then it is possible to reversely perceive what mortals are talking about themselves through the connection established in this dream. After all, it was a ghost capable of returning from the warp. The safest way to do it right now is to wait patiently until the sun regains its dominant position in the world, and until the connection established by the dream gradually dissipates, and then go to the archives to look up relevant information, or consult with the Archbishop and the Church about these ominous things. Omen. In any case, if these omen dreams really pointed to the Captain Duncan and reminded her that the legendary ship Lost Land was stalking Purand, then, as the guardian of the city-state, she must stop that terrifying ghost captain from landing at all costs. A tall, thin, black figure quickly walked across the deserted downtown streets, and the slender figure cast a flashing silhouette under the gas lamp. A completely strange city, a completely strange building, plausible memories in my mind, and a civilian neighborhood that seems deserted and weird during the curfew time. However, Duncan walked in such a back alley, but he was in a particularly happy mood. He succeeded not only successfully carried out the second spirit world walk, but also successfully controlled a body to the ground, and came to the surface of the city-state of Purand. He is in contact with the civilized society of this world, and he is observing the architecture and technology of this era with his own eyes. Moreover, he is still using a complete body, neither open-minded nor open-minded. This body, which looks normal from the outside, can make his next actions very convenient. Frankly speaking, the health of this body is actually not very good. Even in the state of walking in the spirit world, Duncan can ignore most of the physical problems, and Duncan can clearly feel the subhealth state of this body, but he no complains about it, even taken for granted. After all, judging from these two experiences, walking in the spirit world occupies corpses that have died for a certain period of time, but can anything that is alive and kicking be a corpse? A distant barking of a dog came from the end of the alley, and Duncan cautiously slowed down, hiding himself in the shadows between the buildings. He didn't know if it was a patrol dog led by church guards who watched the night, but there was nothing wrong with being cautious. Above the nearby buildings, there are huge pipe structures spanning the low houses. The light cast by the pale scar casts intermittent light and shadow between those pipes. Occasionally, steam leaks from the valves of some pipes. A hazy mist formed in the night. The barking of the dogs went away. Duncan came out from his hiding place, observed the movement on the street left and right, and casually comforted the pigeon eye who was moving around on his shoulder, and then walked across the street according to his memory. Between a row of low 2-story or 3-story buildings, there is an old door with a dirty sign hanging above the door, and the walls on both sides are dusty and lack of care. The window of the store. This is a shop. The scale does not look small, but it is obviously lack of care, and the business is bleak. That's where the fragments of memory in his mind directed Duncan to come. He came to the old door and looked up at the sign on the door. A row of letters could be discerned in the darkness. Ron's Antiques, Duncan muttered under his breath, is a concise name. After speaking, he began to search at the door. Since the memory in his mind was not very clear, he searched for a long time before finding the spare key from a hidden hook under the window sill. The original owner of the body did not carry the keys or any items that would identify him or find the antique shop, which seems to be a prudence of a veteran cultist, but for a person who can for the memory-capturing ghost captain, these superficial cautions mean nothing. Duncan opened the door of Ron's antique shop, stepped in and quickly closed the door. The wooden door slammed, but the sound did not spread too far in the night. The signboard hanging above the gate was slightly tilted in the vibration, and the letters on the signboard squirmed in the pale and cold night. In the blink of an eye, the new words floating on the wooden board, Duncan Antiques. Chapter 41. Inside the antique store. The interior of this antique shop is just as Duncan guessed. It is full of clutter, decadence, and poor business. Even if you just look at the dust accumulated near the window, visitors can imagine that the owner has put his own how bad life is. The first thing he saw was the storage table near the walls on both sides. On the low and stable table were large vases, sculptures, and totem-like things with unknown meanings, while the wall behind the storage table was covered with grids. For placing relatively small goods, the counter is located directly opposite the door, which is a long bar counter. The shelf behind the counter is also dusty, and it is full of dark picture frames and small ornaments. Behind the counter, you can also see a staircase leading to the second floor. It is so gloomy that the structure cannot be seen clearly for the time being. There is also a small door under the stairs. In the memory, that door should lead to the warehouse behind the store. Half of the space inside is full of sundries. It was hard to imagine that the cultist he was possessed lived by relying on such a shop that no one seemed to patronize, and even had spare money to offer to the priest of the sun god. Duncan walked to the deep counter. The old wooden floor was creaking, and when he passed the stairs, he noticed the lamp fixed on the wall. That is an electric light. Duncan frowned slightly immediately. The style of the lamp is unfamiliar. The wrought iron frame and the gray lampshade have an exotic feel. But in any case, the structure of the tungsten bulb inside is clear at a glance. The light source of this lamp comes from electric energy. In this world, is electricity already such a common thing? Ordinary civilians in the lower city also use electric lights in their homes? Then why were gas lamps, oil lamps, and torches used as light sources in the sewers? Why are the street lights outside also using gas lamps? Huge doubts arose, which seemed unreasonable to Duncan, especially in an environment like a sewer. Compared with open flames, gas lamps using flammable gases, and clean and safe electric lamps, there are obvious disadvantages. At first, he thought it was due to technological limitations that the city managers could only use gas lamps as the light source for the sewers, but now it seems, at least in the city-state of planned, technology has long since developed to the level where electricity enters the homes of ordinary people. A huge sense of disobedience filled Duncan's heart. He tried to search for the corresponding knowledge from the memory fragments in his mind, but only got the answers of this as common sense as it should be, and this is how urban planning is. It seems that either this knowledge has not been made public to the public, so that the cultist he possesses knows nothing about it, or this knowledge is so basic that it is not in the cultist's mind a strong enough impression was left in it, causing its corresponding memory to quickly blur and fade after death, leaving only the natural impression. With a temporarily unresolved confusion in his heart, Duncan reached out and turned on the light with a light click of the switch. The bright light immediately illuminated the area near the stairs and the counter. There's also a switch on the opposite wall that controls lights in other areas of the storefront on the first floor, but Duncan doesn't plan to touch it just yet. Nowadays, in the dead of night, a small light in a closed antique shop can be explained by the owner gets up and walks at night, but suddenly the lights are brightly lit, which may attract unnecessary eyes. With the help of the limited light near the stairs, Duncan glanced at the nearest products. The first thing he saw was a carved wooden totem less than half a meter high. The wooden totem was painted with red and blue colors, colored paint depicting eccentric facial patterns, and beside them are antique vases that should be ceramics. They have price tags in front of them, and the price tags mark outrageous prices. The original price is $420,000, and the discount is $360,000. There was such an air of self-abandonment. Duncan's eyes quickly moved away and swept across the entire shop. As long as there is a genuine article here, he will let the lost country smash its head against the city wall of planned. Fake ones can no longer be fake, and no real collectors are needed to appraise them. Anyone with normal intelligence will not believe that this antique shop in the downtown area will sell real antiques. People who can really stock up on antiques will find them here. This ghetto market? The longest running thing in this store might not be the signboard at the door. But Duncan was not surprised by the existence of this store itself. The owner knew that he was selling fake gadgets, and the people who came here to buy things did not expect to have a 1,000-year-old statue in their home. Everyone knew it well what's going on. The civilians in the lower city also need ways to satisfy their spiritual needs. The signboard of the antique shop at the door is not hung up by the shopkeeper for others to see, but for the people who come here to buy things for themselves. After all, there are sellers of jade under the flyover on the earth. 98 bracelets are called old pet ice species. If you wear them home and accidentally knock on the door frame, glass shards can fall all over the floor. Buyers and sellers don't. Do you know what's going on? Duncan is not interested in the bad life of the owner of this shop. He only cares about one thing. This place should be his first stay on land as the captain of the lost home, an outpost for understanding the terrestrial world and modern civilized society. He has secretly made a decision to maintain his current body as much as possible under the condition of walking in the spirit world, and use this antique shop as a cover to operate in the city-state of Prand. And if the training of AI go well, and if AI can transfer real objects between the lost homelander and the plant in a stable and controlled manner, this antique shop will also become a secret material transfer warehouse. Duncan came behind the counter, sat on a chair, and carefully sorted out the memory fragments in his mind, deliberating all possible hidden dangers from them. The original owner of this body was a sun god believer, but he was only a member of the lowest rank in the entire church system. Due to the continuous crackdown by the city-state authorities on cult activities, the living space of the sun god believers in Puland City has been compressed to extreme. Its members are extremely cautious in contacting. In addition to wearing full-covered hoods and masks when attending any gatherings, many members at the bottom even have only one or two specific connectors in contact with the upper echelons of the church. It is undoubtedly a good thing for Duncan today. This means that even among the cultists, there is only one person who knows the real identity and contact method of him. Once this person is gone, no one will know his ulterior heresy status. He can walk upright in front of the city-state's administrators, and his identity is a clean and good citizen. The even better news is that after carefully sorting out his memory, Duncan confirmed that the biggest hidden danger has actually disappeared. Because his connector is one of the 3 black-robed cultists I saw when I just woke up, those 3 unlucky ones have already been dove. He relaxed a little and sat down on the chair in a more comfortable position. After the biggest hidden danger disappeared, if there was anything to worry about, it would be the other sun god believers who held sacrifice ceremonies in the underground assembly hall, and the larger, mysterious, and dangerous sun god church behind those believers. If the memory in my mind is correct, the city-state of Puland had dealt a severe blow to the church of the sun god entrenched in the city 4 years ago. Since then, this heretical belief has been in decline in the city-state, let alone holding any ceremony. On weekdays, they are able to hide themselves well and not be caught by the church guards. It is already thankful. But now, These extremely low-key cultists have done something quite high-profile. The purpose of the sacrificial ceremony was to please the gods, and the other purpose was to collect power or enhance the influence of the gods on the real world. The cultists in the assembly hall at that time, even the priest messenger who presided over the ceremony, were actually all it can only be regarded as the grassroots members of the Church of the Sun God. Will these grassroots members organize themselves to do such a big job? There are not too many memory fragments in Duncan's mind, and it is even more impossible for a grassroots cultist to come into contact with the core secrets of the Church, but he can also guess that those cultists who suddenly revive should be received instructions from higher authorities. That heretical sect that worshipped the true sun god, they wanted to do a big thing in Prand, but the sacrificial ceremony that was accidentally messed up by themselves was probably just the most insignificant splash before the big thing started. Duncan doesn't have any feelings for this Plender city-state, but if he wants to develop from here, he has to consider that a group of lunatics like Helios will mess with him in the city-state. What is the impact? Chapter 42. What I saw in the book The City Under Curfew is not suitable for going out to explore. Duncan stayed in the antique shop all night. The excitement of stepping on land drove him, and he explored the entire building tirelessly. It is true that the original owner of this body was a cultist, but while being a cultist, he is also an ordinary person who needs a normal social life. He needs the convenience provided by modern civilization to maintain himself, communicate with others, and various daily necessities. Need to deal with the whole city, and all of this will leave a lot of clues, allowing Duncan to roughly infer the way of life in the Pulan city-state, as well as the general level of technology and the state of people's livelihood in this era. Even though the memory fragments are blurred, he found a small amount of cash in the hidden compartment behind the counter on the first floor, including a handful of odds and ends, and several blue and green coins of different denominations, which are the common law in most city-states. The currency is jointly certified and issued by the governors of the various city-states and the Boundless Sea Chamber of Commerce. The main currency unit is called Sola, and another peso worth 1/10 of the main currency is issued as a secondary currency. The cash Duncan found was only more than 200 Sola, and according to the information he could remember, the money was probably enough for a family of 3 to survive in the lower city for about a month. It seems that even though the store's business is bleak and most of the family property is donated to the church, the original owner of this body still maintains a basic standard of living. This shows that this antique store still has its own stable customers. Source: there are only 2 parts on the first floor of the entire store. 2/3 of the area is the pavement at the front of the stairs, and the remaining third is the warehouse behind the small door of the stairs. There is another door behind the warehouse, which is the back door of the entire building, should also be the entrance and exit for goods. The structure on the second floor of the store is a bit more complicated. In addition to a bathroom, there are 2 rooms, one large and one small, and a plumbing room shared with the adjacent building. It's clean. In addition, there is a small kitchen on the second floor, but it seems that it was last used at least half a month ago, and everything is covered with a layer of dust. After checking everything, Duncan returned to the master bedroom on the second floor. He looked at this room, which was a circle smaller than his bachelor apartment, and his eyes fell on the small cabinet next to the bed. There's a picture frame in there, and inside it's a black and white photo. The photo shows a family of 3, a pair of young men and women in simple attire, and a little girl who looks only 4 or 5 years old. They are standing in front of the courtyard scenery with obvious artificial traces, looking at the camera with a faint smile on their faces. Here, Duncan came to the photo frame, picked it up, looked at it carefully, and kept corresponding to the vague and messy clues in his memory. The original owner of this body is not in the picture. The people in this photo seem to be relatives of this body, very dear ones. While watching the young couple, Duncan seemed to be able to feel a faint sense of missing emerging from the depths of his memory. However, more information about this photo is vague, it seems. More memories about them have disappeared in this world with the last breath of the original owner of this body. He put down the photo, thinking about what level of consumption such a black and white photo is for the common people in the lower city, thinking about what stage the photography technology in this world has developed, and what is the principle of the equipment used. At the same time, his eyes fell on the neatly made bed, and he felt a little doubt in his heart. A cultist who has completely fallen into the belief in the sun. Will he have a lot of time to tidy up his room so clean? The storefronts on the first floor are obviously neglected. How is the bed in this bedroom so meticulous? He walked out the door again, and came to the smaller room on the opposite side of the stairs, looking at the same neat and clean bed and desk. He sorted out the memories in his mind, and confirmed that the original owner of his body left the shop a few days ago and went to the secret meeting place to attend the gathering of sun god believers. That was the last time he left, and the details of the memory have been blurred, but didn't seem to have the impression of cleaning and tidying up the house before leaving. That is to say, someone else? Anyone else living with this cultist? Is it a relative? Duncan frowned slightly, and while looking for the corresponding clues in his mind, he came to the desk in the small room. His eyes swept over the neatly stored paper, pen and stationery, and finally landed on a book. The book was placed in the most conspicuous position on the desk, with a dark blue cover, a pattern of gears and connecting rods on the cover, and the title of the book was written in beautiful cursive letters, Steam and Gear Art General Textbook Roman 3. Duncan frowned. He had vaguely realized that this room should belong to another person, but subconsciously picked up the book. On the Lost Country, there were no books to read, and there was no half-written article to read in the master bedroom or other places in the shop. The book in front of him might help him understand things in this world. After opening the cover of the book, the inside pages with illustrations came into his eyes. This is indeed a textbook about engineering technology and the principle of steam machinery, and the owner of the book can be seen between the paragraphs of the textbook. Many comments left. The slender and beautiful typeface seems to have been written by a young woman. Duncan rubbed his forehead. The original owner of this body didn't seem to have any relatives or friends. Most of the pictures or impressions in his memory were tinged with coldness and loneliness. Vaguely remembered someone, a girl with dark brown hair. That seemed to be the only figure that was tentatively concerned in the mind of the cultist named Ron when he exhaled his last breath. Duncan's eyes fell on the pages of the book. He didn't bother to look at the words and drawings related to specific technologies, but specifically picked out the parts similar to the editor's introduction and concepts discussion. A line of text suddenly caught his eyes like this: fire, or more strictly speaking, the specific fire released by the burning of fats in the deep sea and mineral crystals near the sea, is the cornerstone that supports the functioning of modern society and protects our civilization. The prosperity and order of modern civilization are based on flame and steam. Clean and convenient electricity cannot replace the exorcism effect of fire, nor can it make large machines run stably for a long time. Experiments have proved that steam is affected by deep space, the most stable form of power. In this chapter, we will discuss 3 typical architectures of steam cores and explain the mechanical principles and design ideas. Duncan's eyes froze slightly. He remembered the gas lamps, torches, and oil lamps he had seen everywhere in the sewers, as well as the gas street lamps on the city streets, and also remembered the doubts in his heart when he saw the electric lamp in the shop. It turns out these seemingly weird situations are actually such reasons. Even if you take a certain risk, you still need to use open flame lamps in the sewer, and when the electricity has developed to a certain extent, you also need to use gas lamps to illuminate the streets outdoors. The reason is that fire can resist the spread of dangerously grotesque. Duncan felt an inexplicable emotion in his heart. He continued to look down, and what he saw were complicated drawings, dense annotations, and notes carefully left by the owner of the book. It was a machine he could not understand at all, and definitely not the steam engine he knew in his previous life. Those precise gears, those extremely complex cylinders, and the connecting pipes and valves between the various parts are far beyond the concept of a steam engine. It is more like some kind of equipment that popped out of a fantasy illustrated book. Contradictory and grotesque beauty is revealed. This is the heart that supports the advancement of civilization in this world today. In deep thought, Duncan slowly put the book back in its original place. Because he couldn't understand it at all. As a person on Earth, even if he had been a teacher, he still couldn't understand what the hell the steam-powered mechanisms in this book were developed to the extreme state. But even so, a vague enlightenment still emerged in his heart. The development of civilization in this world seems to be on a path completely different from what he knows. In order to survive in a world surrounded by crises, the mortal kingdom also presents a grotesque posture. But no matter how weird the world is, as long as it can be called civilization, it must have its own reasons and reasons for its development. The logic is in it. Those gas lamps burning in the sewers, the electric lamps lit in the shops, and the steam mechanisms described in books, which were condensed by the wisdom of countless people, all reveal a kind of tenacity. Chapter 43. Good morning, Mr. Duncan put the book back and checked the furnishings in other places in the house, but found nothing of value. The things in this small bedroom are pitifully few, and they don't seem to be used often. The clues were the book and 2 old notebooks in the desk drawer. The notebook is full of content related to steam mechanisms and engineering principles, occasionally mixed with a few words of complaints about certain teachers or certain classmates. This makes it easy to judge that the person living here is a young man of school age. Duncan slowly sorted out the memory fragments in his mind, and returned to the master bedroom after restoring everything in the room to its original state. Sitting on the edge of the bed and thinking for a while, he got up again and went to the closet next to him. Almost following the memory of his muscles, He opened the door and opened one of the drawers. Several bottles of spirits were quietly hidden deep in the drawer, and there was a half box of painkillers and nerve-soothing pills, which were left in the world by the cultist named Ron. He has a serious illness that has deteriorated to the point of no cure. Poor quality liquor and temporary painkillers are common items in the drawer, but these things are obviously helpful in prolonging the life of a disease-ridden man. It doesn't help, so this man who had lost hope in life turned to this sun sect. The missionaries told him that the healing power of the sun god can solve all the stubborn diseases in the world and purify the body and mind of those who convert. The promise: they have a bloody and weird ritual, using blood as a medium to introduce the vitality of innocent people into the body of sick believers. Duncan doesn't know what the principle of this ritual is, and he doesn't know whether it can really cure incurable diseases. But according to the remaining content in the memory fragments, the cultist named Ron did get better after the ceremony, and further became a follower of the sun with all his heart, and even donated more than half of his family wealth to the messenger. But Duncan didn't care what happened between the dead cultists. He reached into the deeper part of the drawer and successfully found a hidden compartment. After fiddling with it a few times, he found a revolver and a box of bullets in good condition. The Pulan city-state does not prohibit citizens from holding guns, but requires legal procedures, and a fake antique dealer living in the lower city obviously lacks the funds and identity to apply for a gun license, so this is undoubtedly an illegally held weapon. Because of caution, the original owner of this body left the gun in the room instead of going to the meeting place with it. He should usually use this thing to protect his shop, but now it belongs to the captain. Of course, Duncan knew that this was just an ordinary weapon. Not to mention, compared with the abnormal objects on the Lost Homelander, even his seemingly backward flintlock on the ship might have surpassed it. The special power of the revolver, but he is a realistic person. He knows that when he was operating in the city-state of Planned, he was no better than on a boat. The body he is using now is a flesh and blood body, and many places in this city are by no means safe. After all, he can't let the pigeons dove people, and everything he encounters. AIE's activities are too loud, and it is easy to attract unnecessary attention from the church forces in the city. At this moment, a slight sound suddenly caught Duncan's attention. He heard the sound of keys rubbing from the direction of the store door on the first floor, followed by the sound of opening the door and hurried footsteps. Duncan quickly put away the revolver, and at the same time, he noticed that it was already daylight outside the window. He had been busy in this antique shop all night, and the pigeon eye suddenly pressed on his shoulder. "Do you have any questions?" New short message. Quiet. Duncan glanced at the pigeon immediately, and said quickly as he walks towards the door, "You stay in the room first and wait for my order. Also, if there are outsiders present, don't open your mouth." I immediately flapped his wings and flew to a nearby cabinet. "Aye, Captain." Duncan left the room quickly, and just when he reached the stairs, he heard the hurried footsteps had already stepped on the steps, and then a young and hurried girl's voice came from below. "Duncan, uncle? Are you back?" In the next second, a girl with long dark brown hair in a long brown skirt and white shirt came into Duncan's sight. The girl looked only 17 or 18 years old, thin and small. Her hair seemed to be covered with a little morning dew. Her appearance was not too outstanding, but she had the youthful beauty that should be expected at this age. She stared at the standing Duncan at the stairs on the second floor, had a look of surprise on his face. Duncan didn't respond. He just stood silently on the second floor. The sunlight coming in from a narrow window behind the stairs was against his figure, making his expression hidden in the haze. He just looked at the girl silently. After several seconds, I finally spoke slowly. "What did you call me just now? Duncan, uncle?" The girl's face was surprised for a moment, and then she became slightly nervous. She held onto the handrail of the stairs next to her and carefully peeped, as if she wanted to see the middle-aged man upstairs in the backlight. The expression on the face: "Is there something wrong? Have you been drinking again? You haven't been home for several days." I just saw the light on the first floor. The girl's expression and voice fell into Duncan's eyes and ears. She obviously didn't know or didn't think at all to hide her emotional reaction. According to the memory he swallowed, this girl should be the niece of the original owner of his body, and also his only relative. Duncan was vaguely sure that the girl didn't think there was anything wrong with what she said, and didn't realize that the Uncle Duncan she said was a wrong title from the beginning. What went wrong? Why would this girl, who theoretically couldn't possibly know his secret, call out the word Duncan so naturally? Numerous conjectures quickly surged in his heart. At the same time, Duncan also found a little bit of information corresponding to this girl in the memory fragments in his mind. The child with dark brown hair, the original owner of his body, was in the human body. The last figure in the world who still has nostalgia. Nina. Duncan's expression remained unchanged. His tone was flat, and the storm of thinking in his head was completely unexpressed. You lived at school yesterday? I've been living in school these days. The girl under the stairs replied immediately. I thought you would stay outside for at least a week like before, so after packing up the house, I went to borrow it from my classmates. The manager of the dormitory, Mrs. White, agreed. Today I suddenly found out that there was a book left at home, so I rushed back. Are you okay? I feel you strange. I'm fine. I just didn't wake up just now. Duncan responded naturally and then walked towards the first floor. Some kind of extremely outrageous conjecture had already appeared in his mind, and now he had to confirm it. He passed by Nina, and the young girl on the stairs turned her body sideways while looking into Duncan's eyes curiously. When the latter was about to reach the first floor, she suddenly asked Uncle Duncan, "Do you still go out later? Do you want to stay at home for a few more days?" Depends on the situation. Duncan didn't turn his head, because he wasn't sure if the expression on his face was natural enough. He just answered the niece's question with the tone he should have in memory. "I'll go look at the door. If there is nothing wrong, I will be at home these days." Okay, then I'll go back to buy vegetables. The ingredients at home are running out." The girl ran up the stairs as she spoke quickly, with fast steps and a certain lightness in her tone. Duncan had already reached the door of the shop. He took a light breath and pushed the door open. He turned around and looked up at the sign hanging at the door of the store. On the old and dirty sign, a line of letters clearly came into view: Duncan Antique Store. The first few letters are as old as the ones that follow, and there is absolutely no sign of temporary modification, as if it has been so from the beginning. Duncan frowned, and slowly came to the next window. He leaned forward, observing his own face through the picture reflected in the dirty glass. It was indeed a strange face. It did not belong to the majestic and gloomy ghost captain, but the face of a middle-aged man with an unshaven beard, sunken eye sockets, and a tired look. Ron's cultist. Duncan straightened up a little bit. He heard the urban area slowly becoming active around him. There was the crisp sound of bells colliding at the door of the street-facing shops that opened in the early morning. The sound of bicycle bells and the sounds of passers-by talking gradually filled the street. Passing by in front of the store, it seemed to be the neighbor who lived next door, and a greeting came to Duncan's ears. "Good morning, Mr. Duncan. Have you read today's newspaper? The Church of the Deep Sea seems to have destroyed a large den of cultists. This is really a big event." Chapter 44. Breakfast for ordinary people. 12 pesos for a pure-end newspaper, equivalent to a poor breakfast, or the cheapest dessert in the crossings. Newspapers can be bought from a passing newsboy, or a few steps away, to get a copy at the newsagent at the end of the other street. With a few coins in his pocket, Duncan bought a local newspaper at a newsstand. The owner of the newsstand was a middle-aged man who was immersed in reading. He waved his hand when he heard Duncan throwing coins into the box. The newspapers were taken by themselves, and they didn't even raise their heads during the whole process. Duncan glanced at what the other party was looking at, and found that it was an analysis article of past lottery tickets, on which all unrealistic fantasies were outlined with colorful lines. He glanced down at the newspaper he had just bought, and the headline on the front page of the newspaper was the news he was most interested in. Under the leadership of Judge Van Owain, the venerable church guard successfully destroyed a meeting place of the cult of the sun god, captured a large number of believers on the spot, and rescued some citizens. The photo of His Excellency the Judge was printed on one side of the news. To Duncan's surprise, it was a rather young woman with a striking scar on her left eye, but she could still be called the beautiful lady. She stood with her men, standing on average half a head taller than every man around her. The judge was wearing light-fitting armor, a battle skirt, and a two-handed sword that seemed to have come out of the cold weapon era, like a sassy female knight in the medieval style. But behind this lady and a group of church guards, but you can see a huge steam mechanism, and you can even see the obvious fort structure on the steam mechanism. Wonderful and weird style of painting, contradictory but harmonious. Duncan's gaze rested on the picture for a long time. The news that the cultist assembly point was wiped out was good news for him. Without worrying about his identity being exposed, he could see the villains who performed human sacrifices being arrested and brought to justice without any psychological pressure. On the other hand, he paid more attention to the information revealed in this photo. Female judges who specialize in dealing with cultists, fully armed steam armor robots, church armed forces with both cold and hot weapons. The information that is extremely difficult to obtain on the Lost Homelander only needs a newspaper of 12 pesos to read clearly in a civilized society. As Duncan thought before, when the Lost Land drifted blindly for a century, times have changed. Even if you don't consider it from the superficial point of view of who can fight better than whom, the mortal civilized society represented by the Pulent city-state has developed to a stage that can be called wonderful. The intersection is not a good place to read the newspaper. Duncan casually rolled up the newspaper and picked it up. He still remembered that there was a niece named Nina waiting for him at the antique shop, so he walked back. Compared to wandering aimlessly in the city alone, a local who has an innate trust bonus to himself is obviously a better source of information. As for the lost country, Duncan is not worried. Even in the state of walking in the spirit world, he can still clearly perceive the situation on the lost country and the state of his other body, the goat head at the helm for herself. Alice seems to be quite peaceful, and he should be able to act here for a while longer. Anyway, in the crew rules of the Lost Home, there was a statement that the captain will leave the ship occasionally, so it's not a big deal for the captain to walk in the spirit world for 2 days, right? And as the walking in the spirit world continues, Duncan feels that he is gradually proficient in the control of this special spiritual projection, and maybe he will be able to try to control the physical activities of both sides at the same time in the near future. This is not to worry about the physical activity on his own. The situation on the ship during the spirit world walk. A sweet smell suddenly came from the side at this moment. Duncan subconsciously stopped and looked to the side. He saw a cake shop facing the street, and the newly baked pastries were being placed outside. This is the lower city of the Peelan city-state, so naturally there are no high-end dessert shops. But even some of the cheapest and cheap pastries have stopped Duncan in his tracks. There were still a few coins in my pocket, which added up to less than 20 pesos, but more than enough to buy a piece of cake. After a little hesitation, he came to the cake shop and bought a piece of the most common bee sugar cake. The packaging material used by the store to pack the cake was some kind of rough thick paper, which felt rough to the touch. Duncan walked towards the antique shop with the newspaper and cake, but his mood became inexplicably happy. Walk down the street, talk to people, buy things, and go back to where you live. Such a simple thing made him feel as if he was in another world. He almost savored the feeling of breathing on land, and regarded these ordinary daily life as some kind of precious viewed from life experience. Life on the lost country was actually okay. Goathead was loud, but reliable, and Alice was a fun guy, but it wasn't bad to get a taste of life on land. Not long after, Duncan returned to the antique shop. Before he opened the door and entered the shop, he still looked up at the signboard on the shop. A row of letters from the Duncan antique shop was still quietly printed on it. With a feeling of 10,000, the old texture has not changed for several years. He pushed the door into the store, and the sound of the bell's collision sounded crisply, and then there was a rush of footsteps coming from the direction of the stairs. The young girl with long brown hair ran down in a hurry, and then stopped abruptly before the stairs. She supported the pillar next to her and stared at Duncan with wide-eyed eyes, her expression nervous and worried. "Uncle Duncan, where have you been?" she said quickly. "You said to look at the door, but you disappeared in a blink of an eye. I thought you went to the pub or casino again." Duncan looked at the girl in front of him in surprise, and he could hear that she was really nervous and worried about something. She was worried about the only relative left in the world who was dependent on her for life, even if this relative was a drunk, gambling, decadent and violent rotten person, and was also contaminated with the bloody deeds of cultists behind his back. An inexplicable feeling emerged faintly, but the expression on his face remained unchanged. "I just went out for a walk and bought something along the way." While talking, he walked towards the counter of the antique shop, ready to put newspapers and cakes on it, but Nina seemed to be relieved suddenly, and then ran upstairs, saying quickly as she ran, "Uncle, you wait a while, I'll bring down breakfast." "You must have not eaten breakfast at this time. I cooked corn and beetroot soup." Before Duncan could speak, Nina's figure had already disappeared on the stairs, and after a while, she carefully walked down with a large tray. On the tray was a modest breakfast for two. Duncan watched the girl busy up and down with a dull expression, watched her skillfully clear out a space on the counter, arranged the food, and then went to the side to move an extra chair for himself. Her hands and feet were exceptionally nimble, and she exuded a sense of joy that came from nowhere. Duncan watched her busy, wanted to help, but found that he couldn't intervene at all. He has dealt with many young people of this age, but he has hardly seen a child who is as diligent and quick as her. On Earth, she should only be a high school student, but even here, she still looks like a student. Duncan suddenly thought that living with an uncle who had fallen into a cult was not an easy task, but this girl named Nina seemed to have completely adapted to this life, which was not a happy life no matter how you looked at it, but also find something to support yourself in life. "Let's eat." Nina had already prepared everything at this time. She glanced at Duncan and said, as if she had said it countless times, "Dr. Albert said that if you can eat breakfast regularly and maintain a good health mood, in the long run that will work better than booze, than painkillers." Duncan didn't speak for a while, just looked at Nina quietly, and just before the other party's expression became tense, he took the cake that had been put aside before, and opened the package and placed it in front of Nina. Nina opened her eyes wide in surprise, and looked at the thing in front of her in confusion. "This is keke." From the corner, Duncan said casually, "You're growing. Eat something nutritious for breakfast." Nina was stunned. She just stared blankly at the cheap pastry in front of her. It took a long time before she seemed to realize it, and whispered to herself, "Are you really all right?" "Of course I'm fine," Duncan said with a rather natural expression. "It just suddenly occurred to me that I haven't bought dessert for you for a long time." "Indeed, it's been more than a year," Nina muttered, but then she suddenly laughed and picked up the knife at the same time. "Then we are half of each other," Dr. Albert said. "You also need to be nourished as things." Duncan felt odd, but nodded after a moment's silence. "Good." Chapter 45 History. It's a wonderful feeling. Duncan could clearly feel what was happening in the distance. He could feel that the lost homeland was drifting on the vast ocean, that the living ghost ship was constantly exploring the route on the chart under the control of a goat head, that there was a cursed doll with a not very strong head turning around in the cabin, familiarizing itself with the environment on the ship as if on an adventure. The deep and dark sea was slowly undulating around them, and countless strange things were hidden in the sea. However, in his other sight, he was sitting in an antique shop in the lower town of Plan City-State. The voices of people and cars on the street came into his ears, which made the shop even quieter. A human girl named Nina was sitting opposite him, eating the cheapest cake in the lower town in small bites. He is Captain Duncan, the master of the lost homeland, the mobile scourge on the vast ocean. He sits here like an ordinary person, eating his breakfast, deep in the peaceful city. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but he felt that a piece of his heart that had always been hanging and uneasy was settling down little by little. It might be the nerves that were tense for a long time on the ghost ship, or it might be something else, but he felt that this was not a bad thing after all. As if she noticed the gaze coming from the side, Nina, who was eating cake, suddenly raised her head and looked at Duncan curiously. "Uncle Duncan, don't you want to eat it?" Duncan glanced at the food on the other person's plate and asked, "Is it enough for you?" "That's enough. Eating too much sweets is not good." Duncan nodded, picked up the cake and took a bite. He carefully felt the rich taste that he had not tasted for a long time, and felt the rough sweetness slowly dissolving in his mouth. Then, he clearly felt this body begin to process the food he had eaten. He felt a little relieved knowing that the situation was as he expected. This body was better than the first one. It temporarily occupied, its parts were intact, it had not been dead for long, and its own soul had taken over and almost seamlessly restarted the life in the body, which was completely different from the previous open-minded corpse. He is breathing now. Blood is flowing, and his heart is beating. Although the beating speed seems to be a little slower, it should still be within the normal range. There should be no need to worry about the body's decay, and there is no need to worry about soaking it in preservatives. In addition, it will be less likely to be exposed to ordinary people. But there is one thing Duncan is still not sure about. He knew that his body must be sick. Among the memories he devoured, the negative impression of being seriously ill was more profound than all other memories, and the strong liquor and painkillers found in the cabinet before were also proof of this. He didn't know what disease this body had before, because the time and cause of the onset seemed to be memories from a long time ago and had long been blurred. But one thing was very clear. At this moment, apart from the feeling of weakness brought to him by the physique of an ordinary person, he did not feel that there was anything wrong with this body. Did the disease disappear? Did the body heal itself because of the spirit world? Or was it because the projected soul was ultimately limited in perception, so that the body could not actually feel the problem, and the health of the body was actually still deteriorating? Duncan ate his meal calmly while thinking, and then suddenly glanced at Nina, who was eating opposite him. "Don't you have to go to school today?" Nina lives in the lower town. Her economic conditions are not good, but the city-state of Plant has obviously developed to a level where basic education is relatively popular. She now attends a school jointly run by the church and the city hall, majoring in steam machinery. This kind of school can be regarded as a vocational high school, mainly to supply skilled steam craftsmen to factories and churches. Half of Nina's tuition was paid by her uncle, and the other half came from a subsidy from the city hall. For a city-state that has developed into the industrial age, it is quite worthwhile to train craftsmen in this area, even with official subsidies, and it is undeniable that such a school with a very clear purpose has at least solved the literacy problem of civilians. Nina was very studious, and in her uncle's memory, the girl had excellent grades in all courses. "I don't have any classes this morning," Nina nodded. "I only have 2 history classes in the afternoon. Also, I have to go and tell Mrs. White that I won't be staying in the dormitory these days." Duncan suddenly stopped what he was doing. He looked at Nina seriously and asked, "Don't you think staying here to take care of someone like me will delay a lot of things? You can live in the school for a long time, which may be more helpful to your studies." Nina was stunned. She looked at her uncle Duncan in a daze and then suddenly became angry. "You shouldn't talk like that. You are just sick. Just follow the doctor's advice and take the medicine. Mom and Dad entrusted you to me. Your parents entrusted you to me," Duncan corrected seriously. He used his memory to organize his words while speaking. You were only 6 years old at that time. But now I'm 17 years old. Nina puffed her cheeks and stabbed the last piece of cake hard with a fork. You are not even as good at taking care of yourself as I am. If I really move out, you will make a mess of the room in less than 3 days. In fact, you can also let me help take care of the store. At least clean it up. The windows are so dirty that I can hardly see clearly. Duncan listened to the girl's nagging sermon with some helplessness. He didn't expect that his casual test would cause such a big reaction from the other party. But slowly, he couldn't help laughing again. He felt a kind of warmth from the girl named Nina. A warm warmth as if bathed in the sun. Well, I was just saying that. He shook his head, stirring the last bit of soup in the bowl. There's history class this afternoon. How's your history class going lately? Uncle Duncan, are you really okay? Nina opened her eyes wide in surprise. You never. Well, at least you never asked me about my school affairs in the past 2 years. Duncan opened his mouth and was about to say something, but the girl in front of him continued talking. We have been talking about ancient history recently. Mr. Morris was telling us about what happened after the Great Annihilation. To be honest, it's quite interesting. Many parts of ancient history sound like stories, which is far more interesting than modern history and contemporary history. Duncan thought for a moment and said seriously, It sounds like you have learned well? Then let me test you. What are the concepts related to the Great Annihilation? Uncle Duncan was strange today. I couldn't tell what was strange about him, but he was just different from usual. But Nina didn't think too much about it compared to her uncle's slightly strange words and deeds. This simple girl was happier at the moment that Uncle Duncan finally cheered up and seemed to be in a good mood. She was very happy that Uncle Duncan's questions were exactly what she had just mastered. So she smiled proudly and began to tell Duncan what she had just learned. The Great Oblivion occurred about 10,000 years ago. Although for unknown reasons, ethnic minorities with unique cultural heritages such as the Elves, the Senjin, and the Jipro have recorded inconsistent times in their own calendars, the archaeological community generally agrees that the Great Oblivion occurred at the end of the Order era 10,000 years ago. Duncan listened calmly. My mind is full of question marks. Elves? Senjin? Jipro? What's going on? It turns out that humans are not the only intelligent race on land? And elves? Is this the same concept as the elves I understand? Are there still elven city-states living in the steam industrial age in the vast ocean? Some very strange pictures appeared in his mind, and Nina's voice was still coming from the other side. There are some differences in the records of the Great Annihilation among various city-states, but the common point is that the Order era before the Great Annihilation was a far more prosperous, stable, and secure era than today. At that time, there were extremely vast continents, and the ocean area was far from being as boundless as it is today. Moreover, there was no so-called real border between the ocean and the land. The era after the Great Annihilation is called the Age of the Deep Sea. It has continued to this day, and there is still no sign of its end. The most notable feature of the Age of the Deep Sea is that the boundless sea covers almost the entire world, and the land is less than 10% of the old era, and it is divided into large and small islands or foreign lands in the fog. Many city-states today are built on relatively stable islands, and various ocean-going ships have become a means of communication and communication between islands. In the early days of the Deep Sea Age, the remaining people of the Old World suffered a heavy blow, and the old civilization was almost completely destroyed. The ancient kingdom of Crete that rose from the ruins was the earliest civilization ancestor of the Deep Sea Age that can be verified. Although this ancient kingdom lasted less than 100 years, it left behind a lot of heritage that had a profound impact on later generations, including the most primitive and superficial classification methods for many anomalies and phenomena in the Deep Sea Age, as well as a lot of valuable experience in maintaining survival in the Deep Sea Age. Chapter 46 Anomalies and Visions. The Great Annihilation is a turning point in all the history of this world, and it is also the beginning of the so-called Deep Sea Age. According to what Nina told, Duncan finally figured out how the world has undergone tremendous changes and also realized that the world was not as weird and dangerous as it is today. According to historical records, the world before the Great Annihilation was originally a prosperous and safe paradise. The ocean at that time was not the boundless sea. At that time, the limited sea water did not occupy more than 95% of the world's surface as it does today. At that time, human beings still lived on vast and safe land, and even in the ocean, there are no dangerous visions such as the spirit world, the abyss, and the subspace. The era of order recorded in the history books gave Duncan a feeling more like the world he was familiar with, although modern people would look back at the ancient times when there were no abnormalities with surprise and inconceivable eyes. But for Duncan, the world is simply not right the way it is today. There is no detailed explanation of the key event of Great Annihilation in the history books. Although the archaeological community has been making efforts in this regard, there are always great differences between various city-states and various ethnic groups on ancient history. No one knows the so-called how did the Great Annihilation happen, and what was the essence of that disaster. Huge chaos and fog shrouded the upheaval, and after the fog, it was already the age of the deep sea. The sea water from nowhere submerged more than 90% of the land, and the survivors of the remaining civilization established city-states and fleets on the remaining islands and small pieces of land. The strange things of anomaly and vision are still threatening the existence of civilization. But Nina didn't know that there was a ghost captain from a foreign land in front of her who was absorbing knowledge from her words. She only thought it was her uncle testing her homework. It had been a long time since her uncle had such a good mood. She just felt very happy, and even felt that this moment was extremely precious, because she was worried that Uncle Duncan would change back to the way he was before at some point, and based on past experience, it was almost inevitable. As soon as the hard liquor wears off, or the painkillers run out, my uncle becomes extra irritable, and hysterical. So before Uncle Duncan got sick again, she wanted to show him all her progress. Maybe it could make his good mood last for another day or two. Mr. Morris is very interested in the history of the Kingdom of Crete. He is an expert in this field. He told us that although the ancient Kingdom of Crete lasted only 100 years, it was the first time after the advent of the Deep Sea era, a civilization that stood up from the ruins to fight against anomalies and visions. The experience they have explored for 100 years is still guiding most people in the world today. The most important thing is their understanding of abnormalities classification method of, and anomalies. There a way to classify abnormalities and visions? You have already learned this. Duncan raised his eyebrows, and he did not forget to guide in his words. He had been paying attention to it when he was listening to it just now, and it was only then that he became more and more convinced that in the eyes of ordinary people in this world, there should be a strict distinction between those unreasonable things. Some things are called abnormal, and even there are also numbers, but some other things seem to be called visions alone, instead of being classified as abnormalities in general as he had previously imagined. He had never heard the details of this from Goathead on the Lost Country before, and now what Nina learned in school could finally make up for his lack of general knowledge in this area. Nina nodded, recalling what she heard in class, and said, Mr. Morris taught us the simplest way to divide anomalies and visions, which is scale. Usually speaking, the scale of the anomaly is small, often limited to an object, an animal, or even a person. Most anomalies can be moved artificially, and their range of influence is also limited. Many anomalies even only affect one target at a time. With specific methods in hand, most anomalies can also be safely sealed or isolated. Among them, some relatively innocuous anomalies can even be exploited in specific ways, like tools. The scale of the vision is much larger than the anomaly. The smallest vision is as big as a house, and the larger ones can cover the entire city-state, and even bigger than that, so big that it is unimaginable. A considerable number of visions cannot be moved artificially. They are either fixed in one place, or they operate according to their own will, and their ability to influence far exceeds that of abnormalities. Usually, visions can affect infinitely within their effective range. There are so many targets that they can almost be equated with natural phenomena, so there is the name vision. Unlike abnormalities, almost all visions cannot be sealed or controlled. They exist in the world just like natural phenomena, operate without external interference, and naturally affect all eligible targets within the range, and because most visions are dangerous, so what people can do is stay away from these dangerous visions, or avoid becoming the effective target of visions through specific methods. Fortunately, the most dangerous visions usually don't move. The pioneers helped us identify these dangers, and we can safely keep a distance from them. Nina spoke seriously, then seemed to suddenly recall something, and quickly added, Oh yes, the old man also specifically mentioned to us that these judgment methods and characteristics are only usually effective. Anomalies are unreasonable things, so no matter how people sum up their experience, there will always be anomalies or anomalies that do not meet the definition suddenly appear, and sometimes anomalies are interchanged, and there are also anomalies. It is like being interfered and eliminated by human beings. For example, in 1830 in the new city-state calendar, there was an out-of-control anomaly called hyphae in the city-state of Lunsa. The local church guards exiled this out-of-control anomaly to a nearby island at a high price, and in 1835, that island was recognized as a vision, which was later called Fungi Island, but in 1844, the great Saint Palatine took the Fungus Island into his own urn at the cost of his life, so the vision Fungus Island was delisted in the same year, and it became an anomaly again, known as the Paladin's Mushroom Bottle, which is now sealed in the underground reliquary of the cathedral of the city-state of Lensa. Duncan listened intently to what Nina said. His mind was running fast, and at the same time, he concealed the ups and downs in his heart with a calm expression. In this short breakfast, the information he collected has already surpassed the sum of all the days he spent on the lost home. Establishing communication with the land and setting up an outpost in the surface city-state is indeed the right idea. Civilized society is the summary of most information in the world. He subconsciously looked at the girl who was still talking in front of him, feeling quite enlightened in his heart. A civilization that has normally developed to the industrial stage will definitely find ways to compress the basic knowledge of social operation into its own education system. It may be difficult for a child living in this system to realize that the textbooks they come into contact with on a daily basis, what a treasure house it is. It is the knowledge accumulated by countless people over countless years, and has been sorted out and integrated into the most suitable structure for learning and absorption. Those books are the most exquisite nutritional compression package in the world. With the minimum cost of time and energy, a person who is like a blank sheet of paper can quickly become a part of society. Even Nina, who loves to learn, can't realize this. Only Duncan, an outsider, can realize how precious and easy to absorb this knowledge. Nina didn't notice what Duncan was thinking. She just remembered what her respectable history teacher once said in class. So Mr. Morris told us at the end of the last class. He said that people have summed up countless laws in the process of dealing with abnormalities and visions, but only one law is true. It is always valid. That is, no matter how many laws we have concluded, there must be abnormalities or visions that do not conform to the laws appearing in the world. This law is also known as the eternal zeroth by scholars, and it is ranked first in books and papers in all related fields by default, and people have also proposed the famous law of permanent misalignment of anomalies and anomalies. Until today, this law has not been broken. Chapter 47. Chapter 47. Nina was very happy, because it had been a long time since she had a normal meal with Uncle Duncan and exchanged ideas about what happened in school, let alone seeing a smile on Uncle Duncan's face. This reminded her of the past, the time when her uncle was not 6 and she lost her parents at the age of 6. This father-like man became her only relative in this world, but since 4 years ago, that man, the disease that even the doctors couldn't figure out the cause, turned my uncle into another look. During this period of time, to be honest, it was very difficult. Uncle is still supporting her to go to school and maintain her most basic life, but Nina can feel that all the colors about future have gradually faded from this familiar and friendly shop, dissipated in those spirits, pills, and those suspicious friends who deal with uncles in the gloomy and depressing gatherings. She no longer expects to return her life to the way it was a few years ago, but even if the situation improves a little bit, she is very happy. Duncan was also very happy, because he finally got access to more information about this world, and finally touched the historical context of this world. Even if it was only a part of it, it gave him a kind of pleasure to push through the clouds. The completely lost prehistoric era of order, the great annihilation event that reshaped the order of all things, the deep sea age that continues to this day, and the anomalies and visions all over the world. These things that he didn't know at all, or only half understood. At this moment, there is finally a clearer outline. After breakfast was over, Nina got up to clean up the tableware. She was quick in her hands and feet, and it could be seen that she often did these housework on weekdays. No doubt, she was also cleaning up the bedroom upstairs. A guy who is seriously ill, has a decadent life, and devotes most of his energy and enthusiasm to the cause of a cult is obviously not going to do these things. But seeing the busy girl in front of him, Duncan couldn't hold back in the end. He got up and took the big tray in Nina's hand. "Let me carry it for you. See you struggling to go upstairs." Nina looked at Duncan in surprise. She was about to say something more, but the latter was already striding towards the stairs. The girl could only hurriedly follow, reminding her while following, "Uncle, be careful, the doctor said that your condition is not stable yet." Dr. Albert. Duncan didn't look back, and searched for corresponding impressions in the memory fragments as he went upstairs, but there were only a few flashing fragments. It doesn't matter, anyway, he still doesn't even know the cause of the disease. I couldn't figure it out, and the most effective medicine prescribed was painkillers. Then you should listen to the doctor's advice. Nina followed Duncan up to the second floor, muttering as she walked towards the kitchen, "At least he knows how to keep healthy." In the middle of Nina's words, a sound of flapping wings suddenly interrupted her movements. She and Duncan looked in the direction of the sound at the same time, and saw a shadow flashing through the crack of the half-hidden master bedroom door. "Uncle Duncan, something flashed past your room," Nina said in surprise, and then she stepped forward and grabbed the doorknob. Could it be the cat next door? "Hey, don't." Duncan only had time to stop him for a while, and saw that Nina had already pushed open the half-hidden door, and the pigeon hiding in the room appeared in front of the two of them. Aie was standing on the top of the cabinet, with one paw holding French fries and stuffing it into his mouth. The sudden opening of the door made the whole pigeon stand still, and it stood there with one paw stuffing French fries. The two mung-bean eyes stared blankly at Nina and the wall on the other side. Then it saw Duncan, flapped its wings twice, and made a loud noise. Coo? The corners of Duncan's eyes jumped, and he saw that the windows not far away were wide open, which was obviously Ai's escape route, and in the distance, directly facing the windows, a pier could be vaguely seen bathed in sunlight. The pigeon went to the pier to order some chips and came back. Pigeon? Nina finally came to her senses at this moment. She looked at Ai on the cabinet in surprise. Uncle Duncan. There is a pigeon in your room. I see it, Duncan said blankly. I don't recognize it. Ai immediately threw the French fries and flew over, landed on Duncan's shoulder and shook his head. Well, it flew in this morning, Duncan sighed. It may be a pigeon raised by others, but its brain is not very smart. I gave it something to eat and it didn't leave. I listened, cooing loudly. If there were no outsiders present and Duncan gave the order before, it must have started to shout yes 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 at this time. Nina didn't doubt her uncle's words at all. She just looked at the pigeon with bright eyes, then carefully approached and asked Duncan while observing the pigeon's reaction. Then do you want to keep it? Can I raise it? The girl's thoughts were all written on her face. Ai in her eyes was obviously just a beautiful and cute white pigeon. Ai tilted her head to look at Duncan, and made a cooing sound of doubt in her throat. Duncan suddenly felt that the bird understood better when it was silent than when it was speaking. After a while, he pretended to hesitate before nodding his head. Yes, but only if the pigeon is willing to stay. It might fly away at any time, so don't complain then. Nina immediately beamed with joy. Great! I knew, Uncle Duncan, that you were actually a reasonable person. In the central prayer room of the Deep Sea Cathedral, the city-state Bishop Valentine, wearing a black and gold-patterned priest's robe, stood solemnly in front of the icon of the storm goddess. He is tall and thin, with thinning white hair and eyes as calm as deep water. The candelabra in the prayer room is burning quietly, and the holy flame illuminates the room. The icon of Gamona lies on the platform. The goddess has no face, her head is covered with black veil, and her dress depicts many waves. The long corrugated skirt hangs from her body to the edge of the platform. Even though it is only a stone statue, the power of divinity is still manifested here. The whole statue exudes a strong sense of presence. As long as you stand around, you can feel a vague feeling of being watched and sheltered. This feeling of being watched and sheltered is real, and it is under this watch and shelter that Fana, who came to discuss matters with the bishop, can confidently and boldly speak out what she saw in the dream. If what you see in the dream is good, it is indeed the lost country. The bishop of the city-state, Valentine, turned around and looked at the young judge who came to find him early in the morning. Even though from the point of view of the priesthood of the church, the judge in charge of military force and the bishop of the city-state in charge of ceremonies are equal. But when it comes to the study and judgment of supernatural events, it is normal for judges to seek advice from the bishop or even seek guidance. Is that really the lost home? Even though she already had the answer in her heart, Fanna couldn't help opening her eyes wide after hearing the bishop's judgment. I thought, do you think that ship is just a legend now, just like the legends of all kinds of ghost ships that those nervous sailors brag about in taverns? Valentine knew what Fanna wanted to say. The old man shook his head and said in a deep tone, the existence of the lost country is a fact recognized by all city-states and churches. It is not a legend, but something that can be found in church files. I know this. The lost homeland did exist. In the city-state archives of Plant, some of the construction drawings and startup files of the ship more than a century ago can be found, but all these verifiable materials, it's all limited to the time when the lost home is still a ship sailing in the real world, and only when Captain Duncan is still a human. Fanna spoke with a serious tone. She looked at the icon behind the bishop, and her expression became more cautious when she mentioned certain words. The key point is that the ship was clearly recorded as falling into the warp. A century ago, thousands of fugitives from the 13 Isles of Viceroy witnessed with their own eyes that the ship was destroyed by the border along with their homeland, collapsed and swallowed, and fell straight into the shadow of the subspace. And in the decades since then, although there have been eyewitness reports that the lost homeland reappeared in the real world, there is no real evidence, and quite a few scholars, everyone has doubts about the ship's return. While talking, the young judge looked at the old man in front of him. Is it really possible for things swallowed by the subspace to reappear in the real world? So far, nothing other than the lost home has returned to reality after falling into subspace. Even for the lost home, there are only eyewitness reports after the fact. Scholars from all walks of life have doubts about the return of that ship. This is indeed a fact, but this is not the point, the old man said, His eyes suddenly fell on Fan Na, with a strange seriousness on his face. The point is, Judge, are you afraid of something? Chapter 48 about future updates. I actually maintained double updates until today. I didn't even think about it. After all, the first day of the book was too rough, and by the third day, there were only a few chapters left to save. Let's talk about future updates. Double updates will still be the norm in the future, but there will be 1 or 2 single updates every week to restore the adjustment status, which is scheduled to be on Mondays and Tuesdays. After all, I have written books for more than 10 years and I have a lot of problems. It is still a bit too much to maintain the strength of this code word. At dawn, the daily update volume is 3,000 to 4,000 words per chapter and now 2 chapters per day, adding up to 5,000 to 6,000 words. I thought it would not be difficult to just increase this point, but I found that this is my limit. Realized that this elderly man really couldn't beat those tentacle monsters covering his face manually. In summary, the future update plan is single update every Monday and Tuesday and double update for the rest of the time. Double update is still the norm. Hold on for as long as you can. By the way, do you think that when you see this title today, you will return to the order 23,333 in the future? P.S. Although today is Monday, this update plan will start next week. Today and tomorrow will still be double updates, and there will be another chapter at noon. Chapter 49 alert. In front of the statue of the storm goddess Timona, the blessed candles burned peacefully, and the light from the dome shone around the statue, making the city-state bishop in black robes seem to be bathed in divine grace. Bishop Valentine raised his head in the light and stared quietly into Vanna's still firm gray eyes. His words seemed to carry some kind of magic. Faintly, Vanna heard the gentle sound of waves rising and falling in her mind, followed by a thunderous sound. With the help of external forces, the power of the goddess finally broke through the veil and exploded in her heart. Vanna suddenly took a deep breath, as if she had returned to land from the state of suffocation in the deep water. Her chest rose and fell violently, her heart pounded, and the sense of the god's gaze overwhelmed her. In a semi-trance state, she heard Valentine's voice continue to enter her ears. The existence of the lost homeland has historical records, and the omen dream you encountered is an objective fact. With these 2 points in place, your normal reaction should be to first assume the existence of a threat and then seek a solution. But you just subconsciously questioned whether the lost homeland really existed, which means that you were subconsciously avoiding the information conveyed to you by the omen dream. Inquisitor, you are subconsciously denying the existence of the lost homeland. This is the evidence that the ship really exists. It seems that it is indeed approaching the border of the civilized world. Vanna felt a thin layer of sweat on her forehead, but the veil that had always blocked her from the goddess seemed to have disappeared, which made her feel a lot more relaxed. The words of the city-state bishop made her realize what had happened. Unconsciously, I have been affected by the lost hometown. This is exactly the characteristic of many visions or anomalies with horror tendencies. It causes cognitive confusion in those who come into contact with it, leading to subconscious neglect and denial, so that the impact becomes greater and greater without them realizing it. This subconscious neglect and denial is the instinctive reaction of intelligent creatures to protect themselves and is a mentality of avoiding danger. However, when coming into contact with abnormalities, this instinctive reaction will become the source of carelessness and eventually lead to themselves becoming victims of visions and abnormalities without knowing it. As an inquisitor who often deals with supernatural powers, Vanna is well aware of the knowledge in this area, but she never thought that she would fall into this kind of psychological trap. Her strong willpower has no effect at all. I don't know when I was affected, she said frankly. In front of the bishop, who was also a devout believer, she did not avoid the weakness she had exposed this time. It was normal to be affected by anomalies or visions and fall into psychological abnormalities. Shame and concealment would not help. I came here directly after waking up from the dream of omen. I never talked to anyone and never touched any books or ancient artifacts. I don't think I was corrupted by the outside world during this process. But you did show that you were deliberately avoiding the dream of omen just now, so the influence should have occurred earlier. The bishop stared at Vanna's face, as if observing the changes in her eyes and the fluctuations in her breath at any time. Have you come into contact with anything abnormal recently? It may be contamination from the lost homeland, which left an anchor in your subconscious in advance. Recently Vanna frowned, and then suddenly recalled the sacrifice who fell at the Black Sun sacrifice site, the green flames that flashed in the other's eyes, and her severed finger. She opened her eyes wide and stared at the bishop. The day before yesterday, I led a team to clean up the Black Sun sacrifice site in the sewer. Did you report the existence of unknown pollution at the site after you came back? Did you report the existence of a contaminated sacrifice at the site? The bishop shook his head. No, you sent those cultists to the church and went back directly. Vanna's heart skipped a beat. Did anyone who participated in the operation report anything about this? No reports have come in. All the files are filled with information related to the Dark Sun heresy. Under the statue of the goddess, the bishop looked at Vanna, and Vanna also looked at the bishop. It seems that we have found the time when the pollution first came ashore. The bishop exhaled softly. His expression remained calm, but his eyes seemed to be brewing a strong power as if a storm was about to come. In the name of our Lord Gemona, Inquisitor, is your memory of that night still clear and complete? Vanna took a deep breath and said, in the holy name of my Lord Gemona, I still remember all the details of that night. The bishop nodded, turned around and lit the special incense, then placed the copper incense burner at the foot of the statue and said in a steady voice, what happened at that time? So Vanna confessed everything that happened in the sewer sacrificial field. In her memory she did not miss any details. With the help of the sacred incense, her memory and thinking became clearer than ever, and the experience of that night was as clear as if it were relived in her own life. She still remembered that the sacrifice suddenly opened his eyes, and that green flames were jumping in his eye sockets. She also remembered that the flames fell on her fingers, but she immediately purified them. On the way back to the church, she silently told herself that the pollution had been completely purified, the pollution had been completely purified, the pollution had been completely purified. She kept muttering these words to herself along the way, and all the guards walking with her were also muttering these words to themselves. No one thought there was anything wrong with this. Looking back now, it was such a terrifying and strange scene in the desolate night. The church's guards walked through the silent and deserted streets, and everyone kept whispering the same sentence to themselves until they returned to the church. During this process, they still thought they were doing things normally, guarding the heretics they had just captured, cleaning up the dirty sacrificial site, and escorting the cultists back home. The spiritual flame falls on the soul, and the physical purification brought about by cutting off the limbs is invalid. What you get is just a deceptive comfort. The correct way is to immediately burn incense, sprinkle holy oil on the ground to set up a temporary holy place, and then use prayer rituals to call on the power of the goddess to perform the purification of the spirit. This is my fault, Vanna said in a heavy tone. I should have been more vigilant and alert. It was a mistake, but not an error. The old man shook his head. You have great power, but as an inquisitor you lack experience after all. Fortunately, you are now free from the influence, which means that the pollution left on the sacrifice was not too strong. It only interfered with you psychologically. Through the incense ceremony just now, I can roughly judge its strength. He paused for a moment, as if he was considering or judging something. The guards who were acting with you at the time should have been less affected. They were just standing around you, and the impact they were experiencing should quickly fade as they prayed in the church. Overall, although the pollution you were exposed to was dangerous and strange, the source has been cut off, so the subsequent impact is not terrible. According to your performance just now, and the feedback from the incense, even if you didn't come here today, you would have noticed something was wrong in a few days. We should worry more about the future than this. In the future, Vanna repeated the bishop's last word, and her expression gradually became serious. Yes, in the future, this matter is not over yet. The image revealed by the omen dream was a warning from the goddess. What he was currently experiencing was probably just the prelude to a storm. The lost homeland has not appeared in the sight of civilized territory for many years. Many people believe that it has returned to the subspace and become one of the many shadows in the deepest part of the world. But now it seems that Captain Duncan still has an obsession with the real world. Bishop Valentine spoke slowly, turning around and gazing at the statue of the storm goddess. A century ago, the lost homeland fell into the depths of the warp. Although there is no clear evidence, many eyewitness reports mentioned that there was a big storm lingering in the nearby sea at that time. The fall of the ship was affected by the storm to a certain extent. Storms are the authority of our Lord. Vanna frowned. Do you think Captain Duncan wants to seek revenge on God? It's hard to say. Even if it's a ghost returning from the subspace, it's unthinkable to seek revenge on the gods. The gods live in the kingdom of God, which is hidden above reality. All things in the world can only fall from the upper layer of the world to the lower layer. I've never heard of anyone being able to go back to the kingdom of God that is higher than reality. But if Captain Duncan wanted to seek revenge on our Lord's agents in the human world, then it's very likely. The Sacred Storm Cathedral patrols the world on behalf of the Lord on the vast ocean. Most of the time, it sails on hidden routes and no one can find its trace. In contrast, the city-state of Plunder is the largest anchor of faith for the storm goddess in the world besides the Storm Cathedral, and it is also an anchor of faith that everyone can visit. From this point of view, it is natural for the vengeful ghost to choose to land in Plant. Chapter 52. Approaching dark clouds. The gods live in the kingdom of God far away from the real world. The world believes that that special dimension is the cornerstone of the world. Unlike common sense, this cornerstone is not located at the bottom of the world, but at the apex of all dimensions. The ancient kingdom of Crete described the structure of the world they knew in the leftover classics as follows: the cornerstone of the world is at the top, guarded by eternal truth and order, and the kingdom of God is in the cornerstone, self-existing. Down from the kingdom of God is the reality where all living beings live. All living beings in this world can enjoy the afterglow of order in this layer and can survive in a relatively stable and rich real world. From the reality down, it is the spiritual world that gradually deviates from the cognition of mortals. In the spiritual world, the blessings of the gods have been thinned out, and the twisted and grotesque forces have begun to gain the upper hand. Down from the spiritual world, there is a deep sea that is no longer suitable for living creatures and is dominated by strange forces. It can no longer be counted as a part of the material world, but more like a reflection of nothingness. Across the deep seas, the bottom of the world, the depth of the subspace where the shadows of all things are entrenched. The extremely dangerous ancient gods and the bodies of all kinds of sinister things are entrenched in the subspace. In the records of the ancient kingdom of Crete, the gods made a contract in the cornerstone. This contract is the source and yardstick of all the laws in the world. And as the depth continues to decline, the power of order will begin to weaken, and will gradually be dominated by the subspace. The cornerstone where the gods live and the subspace are like the upper and lower end points of the world, then flows in one direction between these two end points. This is an ancient gift left to the world by the brilliant civilization that pioneered the deep sea era 10,000 years ago. In the long years, countless scholars have studied this hierarchical structure exhaustively, but they have not found this model. Now, it has become the world standard model recognized by the world. In this standard model, mortals in the world will fall into a deeper place, but few people can return to the shallow layer from the deep layer. It has never been heard that any existence against the sky can reach the cornerstone dimension where the gods are located from reality. It is precisely because of this that the lost homeland, which returned to reality from the subspace, became the most outrageous vision in the world. Its return flight violated the world's perception of the standard model of the world. But on the other hand, the existence of the lost country is in line with the classic statement about anomalies and visions, the law of permanent misalignment of anomalies and visions. But no matter what, Bishop Valentine and Vanna didn't think that Captain Ghost had the ability to avenge the storm goddess. Even if he had the heart, he couldn't do such a thing. Because the cornerstone is not continuous with the real world, it is not like the relationship between reality and the spiritual world and the deep sea, where there is a relationship of continuous falling and material intercommunication. So far, no scholar has found the cornerstone and reality evidence that the world can be directly connected, and even the gods can only indirectly lower their influence through methods such as projections and metaphors. How can a ghost ship? How can it counterattack the kingdom of the gods? Since it is impossible to seek revenge from the goddess of storms herself, the only remaining option is of course the goddess followers in the world. The Cathedral of Storms, the headquarters of the Church of the Deep Sea, is a pilgrimage ark that sails hiddenly on the boundless sea. It comes and goes without a trace. The Pope who sits on the ark has the power to control the storm on behalf of the Lord, so it is not a good start. Target. Then the Pulan city-state, which is fixed on the sea, has obvious goals and is open to the outside world, is naturally a better choice. 80% of the people in this city-state are believers of the goddess of storms. Vanna has already determined that the ghost captain came for revenge after all. The lost homeland crashed into the subspace in a storm 100 years ago, and she couldn't think of any other reason to explain why it disappeared after so many years. The lost homeland will suddenly return to the real world and point the finger at the city-state of Prant. But what exactly is the ghost captain going to do? Fan Na frowned, and slowly said in thought, Bishop Valentine, do you think the lost homeland has something to do with the recent changes in the city-state by those sun believers? After she finished speaking, she paused, and added, in the dream last night, I saw the burning sun and the lost country together appearing in Purland. The simultaneous arrival of the two disasters may be the omen given to me by the goddess. But don't forget, in the underground sacrificial site, that polluted sacrifice killed the priest of the dark sun. That was a baptized messenger. The bishop shook his head. At least in that sacrificial site, the positions of the lost homelander and the black sun appeared to be hostile. Fanna didn't speak for a while but fell into deep thought because of the bishop's words. The old man opposite her continued after a brief silence, as for those believers who worship the dark sun, I got some advice from the city-state of Rensa this morning. Newsletter Fan Na immediately raised her head. Information? The Sun heresy is not just revived and planned. Recently, they have had changes in many city-states. A large number of Sun heresies have recently transited through the ports of Lunsa and Moko and are gathering in planned. Some of them have been arrested, the old man said. The bishop nodded. During the interrogation, those heretics mentioned shards of the sun. Shards of the sun. Those fragments of the true sun god that were disintegrated and peeled off? Fana suddenly realized, do they think there is a piece of the sun hidden in Pran? It looks like this at the moment. I don't know where those heretics got the information. It may also be the enlightenment they got in their madness. In short, they now firmly believe that part of the wreckage of their Lord is hidden in this city. Bishop Valentine said with a calm expression, and they regard this as the hope for the recovery of the dark sun. Those lunatics, Fana couldn't help cursing in a low voice, to revive that dark and blasphemous sun. How many lives have they killed? The dark sun is what we call it. The sun god in their minds is radiant, and represents the most real order. You can't expect those irrational cultists to have any conscience when their hands are bloody. Valentine shook his head. They firmly believe that what they say and do is justice. When dealing with them, there are only two languages that work best. One is the caliber and the other is the pound. Listening to the bishop's speech in the style of the Deep Sea Church, the corners of Fana's mouth couldn't help trembling. It seems that we have to be busy. The infinite sea is never peaceful, and the cities are also in the infinite sea, said Valentine. Captains face the storm of the sea, and we face the storm of the fools of the world. Judge, be ready, the Pulan city-state may be about to face a challenge. Two challenges, Fana corrected seriously. In addition to the believers of the Black Sun, there is also a mysterious and terrifying ghost captain. If the lost home and the Black Sun are really not the same, then our troubles will come from one it became two. Bishop Valentine pondered for a while. Perhaps there is another possibility. According to the situation in the sewer sacrificial field, the lost home may fight with the believers of the Black Sun. Those two troubles have merged into one troublesome trouble. Bishop Valentine, Fana looked at the old man who had obviously started to think differently. The ghost ship returning from the subspace, and a group of scramblers, the cultists of the sun shards, are fighting in the city-state of Purand, and there may be a godfall of the dark sun in the middle, and I can't think of a worse situation than this. Valentine sighed, acknowledging that Vanna was right. In short, work together with the sheriff's troops first to arrest all the sun heretics that have infiltrated the city-state, and eliminate the threat of the Black Sun before the situation becomes serious. This is an easier goal to achieve, Fana said. After the lost homelander interfered with her mentally and entered her field of expertise, her thinking was obviously active. As for that ghost ship, we don't know what it will do next, so we have no way of doing it for the time being, so we can only do it first. Good for monitoring the spirit world and the surrounding waters of the city-state. Speaking of this, the young judge couldn't help but shook his head, with a serious and helpless expression. Damn, who knows what a ghost captain will want to do next. I want to add some ketchup. Duncan beckoned to Nina across the table. Just pass it over and I'll make it myself. Nina immediately handed over the ketchup. Okay, Uncle Duncan. It's noon now, and Duncan and Nina are having lunch in the small kitchen on the second floor. The meals in the antique store are very simple, a kind of salty pancakes with local specialties in Puland, served with tomato sauce or hot sauce, and vegetable thick. The soup was not a delicacy, but both Duncan and Nina ate it with relish. It's been a long time since Duncan had a normal lunch like this, and it's been a long time since Nina had a normal lunch like this. Duncan thought he was beginning to like the place.
Thanks for joining Fanfiction Reader. If you enjoyed it, hit subscribe and come back for more fan-made adventures.